a year after my brutal divorce. I was standing in the VIP wing of Seattle General Hospital when my former mother-in-law cornered me. With a smug, triumphant smile, she looked me up and down and announced that leaving me was the best decision her son ever made. Now, she bragged, he had a baby boy, a true heir with my former best friend. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply checked my watch, smiled back, and asked if she really believed that. 10 minutes later, a man stepped out of the elevator, and I watched the color completely drain from her face. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and before I reveal exactly who walked out of that elevator to destroy her perfect illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had the ultimate satisfaction of watching a traitor get exactly what they deserve. The crisp, sterile air of Seattle General Hospital usually made people nervous. For me, it was just another Tuesday at the office. I was standing near the expansive glass windows of the 4th floor overlooking the gray city skyline. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, my posture straight, my attention entirely focused on the secure tablet in my hands. I am a forensic accountant. I track illicit financial flows, dismantle shell companies, and expose white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the federal government. On this particular morning, I was reviewing the final wire transfer logs for a massive medical fraud case. I was not there to visit anyone. I was there to close a trap. I was swiping through a decrypted ledger when the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP maternity suite swung open just down the hall. Laughter spilled out into the quiet corridor, followed by the unmistakable grating voice of Patricia. She stepped into the hallway looking exactly as she always did, a walking caricature of old money pretensions. At 62, Patricia wore her privilege like a weapon. She had on a pristine, cream-colored cashmere sweater, a strand of pearls that she loved to remind everyone were vintage, and an expression of perpetual disdain for anyone who did not share her country club zip code. She was adjusting a massive bouquet of imported blue hydrangeas when she turned and froze. Her eyes locked onto me. For a fraction of a second, I saw confusion. Then the familiar mask of cruel superiority slid into place. Her posture stiffened. Her chin tilted upward, and she marched down the polished linoleum floor toward me like a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. I did not lower my tablet. I did not shrink back. I simply locked the screen and waited. My heart rate steady. My mind processing her arrival. Not as a threat, but as a fascinating variable in an equation I had already solved. "Well," Patricia said, her voice dripping with venomous delight, "I suppose I should not be surprised to find you hovering around like a stray dog. Did you follow us here? Natalie, are you really that desperate?" I looked at her, noting the slight tremor of excitement in her hands. She was thrilled. She had been waiting for a moment like this for 12 months, a chance to kick me while she assumed I was down. "I am working, Patricia," I replied, my tone flat and professional. "This is a hospital, not a private country club. You do not own the hallway." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the walls. "Working? Of course you are. You always were obsessed with your little spreadsheets. It is the only thing you are good at, is it not? Certainly not being a wife, and definitely not being a mother." She took another step closer, invading my personal space, her expensive floral perfume crashing with the sterile hospital smell. She wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, anger, a breakdown she could report back to her friends. I gave her nothing but a blank, unblinking stare. "In case you are wondering why we are in the VIP suite," Patricia continued, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Audrey just delivered a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby boy. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure perfection." Hearing Audrey's name, the name of the woman who had been my best friend since college, the woman who had smiled in my face while secretly destroying my life, should have hurt. A year ago, it would have shattered me. Now. It barely registered as a blip on my emotional radar. Bradley is holding his son right now, Patricia boasted, emphasizing the word son as if it were a physical blow. He finally has the family he deserves. The family you could never give him. You know, seeing them together in there, looking so complete, it just confirms what I always knew. Leaving you was the best decision my son could have made. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, waiting for me to shatter. She wanted me to fall apart right there in the corridor. She wanted the satisfaction of knowing that my ex-husband and my ex-best friend had broken me completely. She wanted to revel in the fact that her precious son, the arrogant tech startup CEO who thought he was invincible, had won. I looked at Patricia's smug, triumphant face. I thought about the files encrypted on my tablet. I thought about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I thought about the millions of dollars that had been funneled through dummy corporations over the past 6 months. I thought about the federal asset freezes that had been executed exactly 1 hour and 21 minutes ago. Most importantly, I thought about the fact that the golden child she was currently bragging about, the man she thought had orchestrated the perfect life, was completely and utterly oblivious to the reality of his situation. I slowly raised my left wrist, pulling back the cuff of my jacket to check my watch. It was a subtle, dismissive gesture that I knew would infuriate her. "Is that so, Patricia?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, carrying an icy calm that finally made her smug smile falter. "You are so confident that your son is the smartest man in the world. You are so sure that Audrey is the perfect traditional woman you always wanted for him." She bristled, her hands gripping her expensive handbag. "She is 10 times the woman you are. She gave me a grandson. She gave the family a true heir." I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a hunter watching a trap snap shut. "Is that what you believe?" I asked, softly tilting my head. "Are you really that naive, or just that desperate for a legacy?" "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "You are just bitter. You are a barren, bitter woman who cannot stand to see my son happy." I slipped my tablet under my arm and took a deliberate step toward her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth is always louder than a scream. "I am not bitter, Patricia. I am just observant. And from where I am standing, your perfect family is a house of cards waiting for a strong breeze." She opened her mouth to shout, raising her hand as if she might actually strike me right there in the hospital corridor. Her face was flushed with indignant rage, her aristocratic facade cracking under the weight of my absolute indifference. She drew in a sharp breath, preparing to deliver another verbal assault, completely unaware that the real storm was about to hit. Before she could speak, the distinct chime of the hospital elevator echoed through the hall, signaling the arrival of the very people who were about to tear her perfect world to shreds. Patricia was too consumed by her toxic momentum to notice anything around her. Her eyes were wide with manic energy. She stepped close, the heavy scent of her floral perfume practically suffocating. She raised her hand, pointing an acrylic nail directly at my chest, like a judge handing down a sentence. She wanted to break me. She wanted to see my spirit shatter under the weight of her words. "Listen to me very carefully. Natalie," Patricia hissed, "you were a mistake, a temporary placeholder. My son spent years pretending to be happy with a woman who spent more time staring at spreadsheets than tending to her own marriage. The worst part was not your ambition. The worst part was your absolute failure as a woman." I kept my expression completely blank, though I knew exactly where she was going. This was her favorite weapon, the one she had used to casually stab me at family gatherings for years. Now she was wielding it like a broadsword. "You are barren," Patricia said, spitting the word out as if it were poison. "A cold woman with a broken body. You failed him in the most fundamental way possible. But Audrey understood what it meant to be a real partner. She stepped up when you were too busy playing corporate detective. She gave this family a future. She paused, drinking in the sterile hospital air as if preparing for her grand finale. She straightened her posture, smoothing the front of her cashmere sweater, and looked down her nose at me with an expression of absolute triumph. Leaving you was the best decision my son could have made, Patricia announced, her voice echoing down the empty hospital wing. Now he has a baby boy with your best friend. He has a real family and you have absolutely nothing. Silence stretched between us. It was the kind of heavy, expectant silence that usually precedes a breakdown. She stood there waiting for the tears. She waited for my shoulders to slump, for my voice to crack. She wanted the satisfaction of delivering the fatal blow to my ego, instead of crying. I slowly raised my left arm and looked down at my wrist. The silver face of my Rolex glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning. The timing was flawless. My forensic mind categorized her insults the same way I categorized fraudulent bank statements as useless noise trying to distract from cold facts. I let my arm drop and met her gaze. I did not glare or frown. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. The kind of predator gives when the prey willingly walks directly into a trap. Patricia frowned, her triumphant expression faltering for the first time. The lack of devastation on my face was clearly confusing her. She had fired her best shot, and it had simply bounced off my armor. "Is that what you believe, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my voice incredibly soft and perfectly level. "You really believe this fairy tale you have constructed in your head?" "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her eyes narrowing as a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed her face. "I am talking about facts. I am talking about the beautiful grandson lying in that VIP suite right now. The grandson going to carry on the family name." I took a slow, measured step toward her, forcing her to hold her ground. I looked directly into her eyes, stripping away every ounce of polite societal conditioning we had maintained over the years. "Are you sure it is his?" I asked. The words hung in the air heavy and razor sharp. I watched the cognitive dissonance hit her in real time. The absolute certainty in her eyes fractured, replaced by a sudden flash of doubt. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking much older than her 62 years. "What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice losing all its previous volume and authority. "You heard me perfectly well," I replied, maintaining relentless eye contact. "You are so proud of Audrey. You think she is the perfect woman who saved your son from his ambitious ex-wife. Have you ever questioned how a woman working a mid-level administrative job suddenly afforded a lifestyle rivaling a corporate executive before she married your son? Are you absolutely sure the child your son is holding shares a single drop of your precious bloodline? You are lying." Patricia gasped, her voice trembling now. "You are making this up because you are jealous. You are a spiteful, jealous liar." "I do not lie," I said coldly. "I audit. I look at the numbers. I look at the timelines. And I look at the biological facts that you have spent your entire life trying to sweep under the rug." The aristocratic facade disintegrated. Patricia was no longer the smug society matron bragging about her family legacy. She was a cornered animal operating purely on panicked rage. Her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. The thought that her golden child might be raising another man's baby, that her narrative of victory was a humiliating delusion, broke her mind. "Shut up!" she hissed, taking a sudden step forward. "Shut your mouth right now." She raised her hand high in the air, her palm aiming directly for my face. She wanted to physically strike the truth out of me. She swung her arm down with all the force she could muster, her face twisted in an ugly snarl of desperation. But her hand never connected with my cheek, just as her arm descended. A sharp ding echoed through the hallway. The heavy metal elevator doors slid open with a smooth mechanical hum. The sudden noise shattered the tension, freezing Patricia mid-swing. We turned toward the elevator bank. The real reckoning had officially arrived. But before the individuals inside the elevator could step out into the sterile corridor, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP maternity suite swung wide open. Bradley strode out into the hallway. He looked exactly like a man who believed he had just conquered the world. His expensive designer dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The sleeves rolled up to his forearms in a carefully curated display of exhausted masculine triumph. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and let out a loud theatrical sigh of accomplishment. He expected to find only his mother waiting outside to shower him with praise and validation. Instead, he saw Patricia frozen in place, her hands suspended awkwardly in the air, her face pale with shock. Then his eyes bypassed her and locked directly onto me. Bradley stopped dead in his tracks. The proud, beaming father routine vanished instantly, replaced by a defensive, arrogant sneer that I recognized all too well. He dropped his hands to his sides and squared his broad shoulders, puffing out his chest as he closed the distance between us. He placed a highly protective hand on Patricia's shoulder, physically inserting himself between me and his mother. "What in the world are you doing here?" Natalie Bradley demanded, his voice thick with unearned condescension. "I knew you were struggling to let go of the past, but stalking my family at the hospital crosses a major legal line." I did not flinch. I kept my encrypted tablet securely tucked under my arm and met his hostile gaze with absolute serenity. "I am not stalking anyone. Bradley, I am simply finishing a highly complex audit." He let out a sharp derogatory laugh that bounced off the hallway walls. "Of course you are. An audit. Because that is literally all you have ever cared about. You are still the exact same miserable woman I divorced a year ago. You could not handle the fact that I was building a visionary tech company. So you tried to suffocate me with your endless spreadsheets and your relentless negativity." He turned to his mother, offering her a reassuring squeeze before looking back at me with pure venom. "You know, seeing you standing here clutching your work files while my beautiful, loving partner is resting inside with my newborn son really puts everything into crystal clear perspective. It reminds me exactly why our marriage died. It died because of your obsessive ambition as an accountant. You loved climbing the corporate ladder more than you ever loved me. You wanted to police my startup instead of supporting my dreams like a real partner should." I watched his jaw clench as he prepared to deliver what he thought was the ultimate psychological strike. He leaned closer, lowering his voice into a cruel, mocking register designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. "But we both know the real reason I had to leave." "Bradley," whispered his eyes flashing with malice, "you have a barren womb." "Natalie, you are biologically incapable of giving a man a family. Audrey gave me a son. She gave me a legacy. You gave me nothing but tax lectures and a cold bed. You are a completely defective woman." Patricia let out a breath she had been holding, her aristocratic arrogance returning now that her son was actively shielding her. She nodded in vigorous agreement, her eyes gleaming with renewed malice as she watched Bradley attempt to tear me down piece by piece. I stood perfectly still, letting his misogynistic gaslighting monologue wash over me without absorbing a single drop of his toxic intent. A year ago, those exact words would have sent me into a dangerous spiral of self-doubt and agonizing grief. I would have internalized his blame, believing that my dedication to my career and my supposed medical failures were the sole reasons my life had fallen apart. But today, armed with federal warrants and irrefutable financial data, his insults sounded like the desperate, pathetic ramblings of a man unknowingly standing directly on a landmine. I offered him a tight, razor-thin smile. My ambition was never the core problem. Bradley, the underlying problem was always your catastrophic lack of liquidity. You always preferred burning through restricted capital rather than managing it correctly. Bradley scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically toward the ceiling. Listen to yourself right now. You are standing outside a maternity ward trying to talk about liquidity and asset management. You are completely unhinged. This is exactly why Audrey is 10 times the partner you could ever hope to be. She understands my grand vision. She understands absolute loyalty. Does she understand unauthorized capital diversion? I asked, keeping my tone mild and perfectly conversational. Does she comprehend the severe legal ramifications of a Series B capital bleed? Because from my professional perspective, your grand vision requires an awful lot of unverified offshore transactions just to stay afloat. His smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. A tiny muscle in his jaw twitched, but his monumental ego quickly overrode his basic common sense. He laughed again, though it sounded noticeably more forced this time. You are truly pathetic. Natalie, you are literally making up complex financial buzzwords to try and sound intimidating because you absolutely cannot handle the fact that I won. My startup is officially valued at $30 million. My primary investor considers me a generational visionary. I have a gorgeous woman who adores me and a healthy son to carry on my powerful name. You have a leather briefcase and a lonely apartment. I tilted my head, studying him as if he were a particularly fascinating biological specimen trapped under a microscope. $30 million is a highly optimistic valuation for a company experiencing massive asset depreciation, I noted calmly, especially when the operating budget is being actively drained to fund personal luxury real estate acquisitions. Tell me, Bradley, exactly how long does it take for a visionary to realize his entire equity structure is built on federal wire fraud? Patricia stepped out from behind her son, her voice shrill and commanding once again. Do not let her speak to you this way. Bradley, she is just a jealous, barren ex-wife trying to ruin the happiest day of your life. Call hospital security and have her removed immediately. She does not belong anywhere near us. Bradley nodded, pointing an aggressive finger directly at my face. You are going to leave this hospital right now. Natalie, if you ever come near my family or my company again, I will have my lawyers bury you so deep in civil harassment lawsuits. You will never see the inside of an accounting firm again. You are nothing to me. You are a failed wife and a failed woman. I did not break eye contact. I absorbed his empty threats with the tranquil satisfaction of an auditor who has already meticulously balanced the final ledger. Your defense lawyers are going to be very busy soon. Bradley, I replied smoothly, though I highly doubt they will have any time to focus on frivolous harassment suits. They will be far too occupied trying to explain your gross fiduciary negligence and your impending structural insolvency. You are insane! He spat, turning his broad back on me to guide his mother toward the maternity suite doors. Let us go! Mom, I am not wasting another single second of my son's birthday dealing with a bitter accountant who simply cannot accept defeat. I stood my firm ground in the center of the corridor, my hands resting lightly on the cool edges of my encrypted tablet. I watched Bradley walk away, his chest puffed out, completely blind to the financial and legal guillotine positioned directly above his neck. He had taken the bait perfectly, using his blinding arrogance to dig a grave so deep he would never be able to climb out. We will see who accepts defeat. Bradley, I murmured to the empty space between us, allowing him to dig his own grave just a little deeper. He thought he had successfully rewritten our history, transforming me into the villain of his triumphant narrative, while he played the victorious hero. He thought his gaslighting had effectively silenced me forever. But forensic accounting relies on a universal truth that narcissists fundamentally fail to grasp. Numbers never lie, and they never forget. His words meant absolutely nothing compared to the massive digital paper trail he had foolishly left behind. Every single cruel insult he hurled at me was simply another piece of evidence confirming his profound ignorance. He believed that securing venture capital funding and parading a newborn baby around a hospital hallway made him untouchable. But true power did not lie in arrogant speeches or stolen assets. True power rested in the quiet, methodical uncovering of facts. I took a slow, steady breath and prepared to completely dismantle the fraudulent empire he had built on my stolen equity, before Bradley could pull open the heavy mahogany doors. I spoke again, pitching my voice to cut through the quiet corridor like a whip. "Do you remember the night you served me the divorce papers, Bradley?" "Because I remember the exact numbers on your balance sheet from that afternoon." Bradley froze. His hand hovered over the polished brass door handle. Slowly, he turned back around. His mother looked between us, sensing the sudden violent shift in the atmosphere. The confident smirk melted off his face, leaving behind a pale mask of dread. "You were terrified," I said, stepping forward so he had no choice but to face me. "You were sweating through your custom suit, but it was not because you were leaving your wife. It was because earlier that day I had asked you about the Series B funding discrepancy." His face drained of color. I had his full attention now. 12 months ago. I continued, keeping my delivery rapid and clinical. "You begged me to review your financial projections. You wanted me to clean up your ledgers before the venture capital partners conducted their due diligence. You thought I would just glance at the top-line revenue and blindly validate your genius to your investors. You assumed I would be a good, obedient wife and stamp my professional approval on your garbage accounting. But I am an auditor. Bradley, I do not look at the ceiling. I look at the foundation." I took another step closer, forcing him to press his back against the heavy wooden doors of the maternity suite. I found the anomaly in under an hour. $700,000 listed as generic vendor payouts. Except the vendor identification numbers did not match any registered corporate entity in the state of Washington. I asked you a simple, standard accounting question about where that massive chunk of capital was flowing. Do you remember your exact reaction? Bradley swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the elevator, suddenly desperate for an escape route that did not exist. "You panicked," I stated, answering my own question. "You realized you had just handed a forensic accountant the exact roadmap to your embezzlement. You knew that if I pulled one single thread, your entire house of cards would collapse. Your primary investor would pull his funding, and you would face federal charges for corporate fraud. You needed to stop me from looking at your books immediately." Patricia tried to interject, her voice trembling as she clutched her expensive handbag tightly. "Bradley, what is she talking about? What stolen money?" "Shut up, Mom," Bradley hissed, his eyes locked on mine wide with mounting terror. "How do you stop a forensic accountant from uncovering your financial crimes?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You blindside her. You detonate a bomb in her personal life so massive that she cannot even think straight, let alone audit a ledger. You filed for a brutal, sudden divorce 48 hours after I found that anomaly. He had used cruelty as a smokescreen. I laid out the psychological warfare he had waged against me right there in the hospital hallway, ensuring his mother heard every single word of his cowardice. You served me papers at dinner. You packed your bags while I was still trying to process what was happening. You screamed that I was suffocating you, that I was a cold, calculating machine who cared more about numbers than human connection. It was a brilliant distraction tactic. Bradley, you manufactured a devastating emotional crisis to force me out of our home, out of your accounts, and completely off your financial trail. I watched him struggle to breathe. His chest heaved under his designer shirt. The illusion of his absolute success was suffocating him. But a sudden divorce was not quite enough. Was it? I pressed on, relentless and unyielding. You needed to break my spirit entirely. You needed to make sure I was so deeply depressed and consumed by inadequacy that I would not fight you during the asset mediation. So, You and your new mistress devised a master stroke of psychological torture. I let a cold, mocking smile touch my lips. You needed a reason for leaving me that would shatter my identity as a woman. You knew we had been trying to start a family. You knew my deep anxieties about our struggles. And conveniently, Audrey worked as a senior clinical administrator at Seattle Women's Health. She had unrestricted access to the hospital database, a hospital system remarkably similar to this one. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the reality of my words began to penetrate her stubborn denial. Audrey illegally accessed my medical files, I stated, delivering the facts with lethal precision. She forged a clinical diagnosis declaring me permanently infertile. She printed it on official clinic letterhead, forged the signature of my attending gynecologist, and handed it to you. You brought that forged document to our kitchen table. You threw it in my face. You told me you wanted a legacy, and that I was biologically useless to you. You broke me, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. You convinced me my body was defective. You watched me spiral into a depression so dark I could barely get out of bed. And while I was mourning the children, I thought I could never have you rush through the mediation, claiming the business assets were toxic and securing the lion's share of our marital wealth. Bradley looked physically ill. The arrogant tech visionary had vanished, replaced by a terrified man realizing the depth of his exposure. The psychological warfare was no longer his weapon. It mine. You thought you were a mastermind, I concluded, watching his eyes dart wildly around the hallway. You thought destroying my sanity was the perfect crime to cover up your stolen wealth. But you forgot one crucial detail. Grief fades over time. Bradley. But the numbers always remain. Patricia shook her head, her perfectly coiffed hair trembling as she desperately tried to cling to the narrative she preferred. You are twisting things, Patricia declared, her voice pitched high with panicked denial. Bradley did not need to manipulate you. He simply realized his worth. He realized he needed a traditional devoted woman by his side. Audrey is a true partner. She understands family values. She does not care about money or spreadsheets. She cares about providing a warm, nurturing home for my son. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed down the quiet hospital wing. A traditional devoted woman. Is that what Audrey told you while she was picking out the custom Italian marble for the new kitchen she bought with my stolen equity? Patricia blinked, her brow furrowing. What are you talking about? I turned my gaze entirely to Bradley. He was practically vibrating with anxiety, his eyes darting frantically toward the elevator bank. He knew the financial guillotine was dropping. Let us talk about the divorce settlement. Bradley, I said, my voice dropping into the precise clinical cadence I used during federal depositions. Let us talk about how a traditional woman financed her sudden transition into luxury living. I took a step closer, tapping my fingernail against the edge of my encrypted tablet. When you pushed the expedited mediation 12 months ago, you sat across from me in that sterile conference room and cried. You played the broken, desperate entrepreneur perfectly. You told the mediator your startup was bleeding capital. You claimed the venture capitalists were threatening to pull their backing because the market was volatile. You swore your business assets were essentially toxic, holding zero liquid value. Bradley swallowed audibly. His throat bobbed. He took a half step backward, pressing his shoulders against the heavy mahogany door of the maternity suite. I was grieving. I continued my tone devoid of pity. I was heavily medicated, barely sleeping, destroyed by the fraudulent medical file Audrey handed you. I just wanted the pain to end. I wanted to escape the marriage without a protracted legal battle. So when you begged me to surrender 60% of my home equity to keep you out of bankruptcy, I agreed. The total equity in our Seattle property was valued at $1.2 million. I was legally entitled to $600,000. Instead, I walked away with barely $200,000 because I believed you were financially drowning. Patricia looked at her son, her expression shifting from indignant rage to severe confusion. Bradley, what is she saying? You told me you bought her out fairly. He did not buy me out. Patricia, I stated, never breaking eye contact with him. He robbed me blind. I unlocked my tablet. The screen glowed with lines of data highlighting the digital trail I had spent the last 6 months painstakingly verifying. Let us look at the cold, hard numbers, I said smoothly. The day before our mediation was finalized, you claimed your liquid assets totaled $42,000. You submitted sworn affidavits to the court attesting to your impending insolvency. But numbers leave a footprint. Bradley, they leave a digital echo that an amateur like you cannot erase. I swiped to the next screen to the 4 days prior to signing our settlement. You executed a wire transfer of $2.8 million. You routed it through a holding company registered in Delaware, which immediately pushed the funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Specifically, an account held at the Grand Cayman branch of Royal Atlantic Bank under the shell entity name Apex Horizon Holdings. Bradley let out a choked gasp. The blood vanished from his face entirely, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to brace a hand against the doorframe to stay upright. I swiped the screen again. Relentless. 72 hours later. You moved another $1.4 million into a secondary trust in Bermuda. You deliberately hid $2 million in liquid capital while sitting in a mediation room swearing under oath that you were practically destitute. You committed severe perjury to strip me of my rightful share of the marital assets. You're making this up, Patricia demanded, though her voice shook violently. She looked at Bradley, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for her golden child to scream that it was all a lie. But Bradley could not speak. He was hyperventilating. He used my home equity to buy the waterfront property in Bellevue. I told Patricia, my words precise and lethal. The house Audrey currently lives in. The house you think your son bought with his hard-earned tech money. He bought it with funds he stole from me during a divorce settlement he engineered through psychological abuse. I turned back to Bradley. You thought you were so clever using Apex Horizon Holdings. You thought registering the shell company under Audrey's maiden name would shield you from discovery. But Audrey is not a financial mastermind. She is a woman who loves to spend other people's money. She left a sloppy trail of property taxes and luxury car payments drawing directly from that Cayman routing number. Please, Bradley croaked, his voice cracking. The arrogant tech visionary was gone, replaced by a terrified man begging for mercy in a hospital hallway. Natalie. Stop. I am an auditor, I replied, my voice echoing off the polished floors. I never stop until the ledger balances. You stripped me of my home. You stripped me of my dignity. You thought you could leave me with nothing while you and your devoted woman funded a millionaire lifestyle on my stolen equity. But the truth about hidden assets is that they require maintenance. They require constant vigilant movement to remain undetected. And the moment you transferred $300,000 last month to purchase Audrey a custom Mercedes SUV, you triggered a federal anti-money laundering flag. Bradley closed his eyes, his chest heaving. He knew exactly what that meant. The illusion of his genius had been utterly dismantled. He was not a visionary. He was a common thief caught dead to rights, trapped by the exact same woman he had deemed too obsessed with spreadsheets to notice his betrayal. And the numbers. Bradley, I whispered, stepping right into his personal space, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are completely, undeniably finished. But Patricia, desperately clinging to her illusions, shook her head. Her hands flew to her ears as if she could block out the financial realities I had laid bare. She retreated to the only battlefield she fully understood. I do not care about holding companies or offshore accounts, Patricia sputtered, her voice cracking under the intense strain of her denial. Money is just money. It does not change the fact that Audrey gave him a child. She gave him life. You can wave your spreadsheets around all day. Natalie. But Audrey gave us a family. She is a sweet traditional girl. You are just trying to destroy them because your own body was completely useless. I slowly turned my attention from Bradley's sweating, terrified face back to his mother. The mention of Audrey being a sweet girl and my body being useless was the exact opening I needed. The financial ruin was just the opening act. Now it was time to tear out the very foundation of their twisted morality. My body was never useless. Patricia, I said. The hallway temperature plummeted. I stepped away from Bradley and faced her directly. My voice lost its clinical edge, replaced by a deep, resonant fury that had been freezing over for 12 agonizing months. I was never infertile. That diagnosis was a complete fabricated lie. Bradley's head snapped up the panic of the financial trap, momentarily overridden by total confusion. "What are you talking about?" he choked out. "I saw the clinic paperwork. Audrey printed it out for me." "Audrey printed it out for you," I repeated, letting the profound stupidity of his statement hang in the air. Audrey, the woman who stood to gain absolutely everything from our divorce. Audrey, the senior administrator, who had unrestricted access to the database and a blank prescription pad. You trusted a devastating medical diagnosis handed to you directly by your own mistress. Patricia took a staggering step back, gripping her purse. "You are lying. You are just saying this to hurt him. I was pregnant." "Bradley," I said, my voice striking the walls like a physical blow. Bradley stopped breathing. His hands dropped limply to his sides. "No," he whispered. "No. That is impossible. I was 9 weeks pregnant." I stated, locking my eyes onto his. "We had finally succeeded. I found out the morning of your big investor pitch. I wanted to surprise you. I bought a tiny pair of shoes. I wrapped the positive test in a little box. I was waiting for you to come home so we could celebrate the family we had been praying for." I watched the color completely drain from Bradley's lips. He remembered that night. He remembered coming home late, smelling of Audrey's perfume, ready to pick a fight to justify his sudden exit. "But I never got to give you that box." I continued my words, precise and merciless. Because that same afternoon, the severe cramping started, then the bleeding. By the time you walked through the front door with divorce papers in your briefcase, I was lying on the bathroom floor in absolute agony, experiencing a brutal hemorrhagic miscarriage. Patricia let out a quiet gasp, her hands covering her mouth. For a brief second, the society matron vanished, leaving only a mother horrified by the brutal reality of a lost child. "You found me on the floor," I told Bradley, forcing him to relive the darkest night of my life. "You carried me to the car. You drove me to this exact hospital. And while I was bleeding out in the emergency room mourning the child I had wanted more than anything in this world, you were pacing the waiting room texting Audrey. You were telling her that the timing was perfect. You filed the divorce papers 3 days later, claiming you could not be tied to a woman who could not give you a child. I did not know." Bradley stammered, his voice breaking. He looked physically sick, his chest heaving as the memories collided with my new revelation. "The doctors told me it was a severe hormonal collapse. They said your body just rejected it." "The doctors told you what Audrey instructed them to tell you." I corrected him sharply. "She was the clinic administrator handling my emergency intake. She intercepted my charts. She controlled the flow of information to you and to me. But she made one catastrophic mistake. She underestimated my need for absolute certainty." I unlocked my tablet again. My fingers moved swiftly, pulling up a highly classified medical document. I turned the glowing screen toward Bradley and Patricia. "Grief does not blind me." Bradley. "It focuses me." Months later, when I finally had the strength to investigate my own medical records, I hired an independent toxicologist. I had them pull the frozen blood samples taken during my emergency room admission. I wanted to know exactly why my perfectly healthy pregnancy ended so violently. Bradley stared at the glowing screen. His eyes scanned the highlighted text reading the chemical compounds listed on the official laboratory report. "Do you know what misoprostol is, Bradley?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. He shook his head slowly, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "It is a powerful abortifacient," I explained, watching the horror slowly dawn on his face. "It induces immediate severe uterine contractions. And according to this toxicology report, my blood contained massive toxic levels of it on the night I miscarried." Patricia let out a strangled cry. "No, that is not possible. You did not take that." "Of course I did not take it," I said, stepping right into Bradley's line of sight, forcing him to look at me instead of the screen. But someone else made sure I did. Someone who came over to my house every single morning for coffee. Someone who claimed to be my best friend supporting me through my fertility struggles. Someone who had unrestricted access to my kitchen cabinets and my daily prenatal vitamins. Bradley's jaw dropped. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the door of the maternity suite. "Audrey." He whispered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. "Audrey," I confirmed, letting the name echo in the hallway. "Your sweet, traditional, devoted partner." She swapped my prenatal vitamins with high-dose abortifacients. She did not just forge a medical document to speed up our divorce. "Bradley, she deliberately poisoned me. She murdered your unborn child to ensure you would leave me and bring your stolen millions directly to her." Bradley looked like he was going to vomit. The arrogant, triumphant CEO who had strutted out of the delivery room 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a broken, horrified man realizing that the woman he was currently building a life with was not a loving partner. She was a calculating, remorseless sociopath. She killed our baby. Bradley choked out his hands, gripping his hair as he slid down the door, his knees completely giving out. "She killed my baby. She eliminated an obstacle." I corrected him coldly, watching him crumble onto the polished linoleum floor. "Just like you eliminated me to protect your offshore accounts. You two truly deserve each other." Before the crushing weight of that revelation could fully settle over the corridor, the sharp metallic chime of the elevator echoed through the sterile air once again. The heavy silver doors glided open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. Out stepped Jamal. He moved with the kind of effortless, silent power that immediately commanded the atmospheric pressure of any room he entered. At 36 years old, Jamal was a towering figure of absolute authority. He wore a razor-sharp midnight blue Tom Ford suit that draped flawlessly across his broad shoulders, paired with a crisp white shirt and a perfectly knotted silk tie. In his right hand, he gripped a sleek black leather briefcase. His highly polished Oxfords clicked against the linoleum in a steady, measured rhythm as he walked toward us. Patricia whipped her head around at the sound of his footsteps. The sheer horror and confusion that had frozen her face just moments ago instantly morphed into a mask of ugly, elitist indignation. Patricia had always harbored a deep-seated, barely concealed disdain for Jamal. To her, the brilliant African-American attorney who had married her daughter Rachel was nothing more than an opportunistic outsider. She had spent the last 5 years making endless venomous microaggressions about his background, fully convinced that he was somehow beneath the pristine bloodline of her aristocratic family. "What in the world are you doing here, Jamal?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with toxic entitlement. She completely ignored the fact that her son was currently hyperventilating on the floor. She took a step toward Jamal, raising her chin in a pathetic attempt to reassert dominance. "This is a secure VIP maternity floor. You have absolutely no business being here." Jamal did not stop walking. He did not break his stride, and he certainly did not look at her. "I said, what are you doing here?" Patricia snapped, stepping directly into his path. "Bradley just had a son. We are dealing with a deeply personal, highly sensitive matter right now. This is for family only. I want you to turn around, get back in that elevator, and leave immediately. You do not belong here. And you never have. Jamal finally stopped, but he still did not look at Patricia. Instead, he turned his warm, intelligent eyes entirely onto me. The intimidating federal aura that rolled off his shoulders softened for a brief fraction of a second as he offered me a genuine, reassuring smile. "Are you all right, Natalie?" Jamal asked, his rich, deep voice cutting through the hysterical tension of the hallway. He spoke with the calm cadence of a man who held every single winning card in the deck. "I am perfectly fine, Jamal," I replied, matching his steady tone. "I was just giving Bradley and Patricia a comprehensive update on their current financial and medical realities. The audit is complete." Jamal nodded slowly, a glint of predatory satisfaction shining in his dark eyes. "Excellent work, as always. I assume our former brother-in-law is processing the data accordingly." He casually glanced down at Bradley. The supposed tech visionary was still slumped against the heavy wooden door of the maternity suite, clutching his knees, staring blankly at the floor as he muttered Audrey's name over and over. "How dare you ignore me?" Patricia shrieked, her face turning a mottled, furious red. Her hands trembled with rage. "You arrogant, ungrateful man. I am speaking to you. You are Rachel's husband, nothing more. You are not a part of this inner circle. You do not have the clearance or the pedigree to stand here and insert yourself into my son's affairs. Security will be called if you do not vacate this corridor immediately." Jamal slowly turned his head to look at Patricia. The warmth he had shown me vanished instantly, replaced by the frigid, unyielding gaze of a man who dismantled corporate empires for a living. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to shout to establish his absolute supremacy. "Patricia," Jamal said, his tone dangerously smooth, "I highly suggest you lower your voice and step out of my personal space before you say something that will be recorded in a federal deposition." Patricia flinched instinctively, taking a half-step backward. The sheer weight of his authority was suffocating. She tried to maintain her haughty glare, but the foundation of her arrogance was cracking rapidly. "I am not here as Rachel's husband today." Jamal continued, taking a deliberate step forward, forcing Patricia to retreat even further. He held up the black leather briefcase, the polished silver clasps catching the harsh hospital light. "I am here in my official capacity as a federal financial crimes attorney, and I can assure you, Patricia, the only people who do not belong in this hallway are the ones currently facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny." Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace as if it could somehow protect her from the incoming strike. She looked at the briefcase, then at Jamal, and finally back at me. Her mind was desperately trying to connect the terrifying dots we had just laid out in front of her. "You see," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the lethal weight of a closing argument. "While you were busy making racist remarks at family dinners and pretending your son was a Silicon Valley genius, Natalie and I were conducting a joint operation. You thought you could treat me like a second-class citizen because of the color of my skin and the neighborhood I grew up in. You thought you could discard Natalie because she refused to be a subservient trophy wife. You deeply underestimated both of us." He stepped around Patricia as if she were nothing more than a piece of misplaced hospital furniture, and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. The alliance was finally out in the open. The forensic accountant and the federal prosecutor standing united against the family that had tried to destroy us both. "Bradley," Jamal barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "Get up off the floor. You are embarrassing yourself, and we have a significant amount of federal paperwork to review." Bradley flinched at the sound of Jamal's commanding voice. He slowly raised his head, his eyes red and bloodshot. He looked from Jamal to me, his chest heaving as the crushing reality of his situation continued to solidify. He was trapped. There was no charismatic speech or venture capital funding that could save him now. Jamal adjusted his pristine cuffs, his expression completely devoid of mercy. You filed fraudulent financial affidavits during a federal court proceeding. Bradley, you utilized offshore shell corporations to hide stolen marital assets. And you did it all while leaving a digital trail so wide a first-year law student could follow it. Did you really think you were going to get away with this? Bradley tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Snorts. Saw? He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the elevator, then toward the maternity suite where Audrey was resting. This hallway is quickly becoming very crowded, Jamal noted, glancing at the glowing numbers above the elevator bank. And you are going to need every ounce of energy you have left for the next arrival. Because trust me, Bradley, the federal charges are about to become the absolute least of your problems today. Bradley stared at Jamal, his mouth opening and closing silently. The threat of federal charges was a suffocating weight penetrating his thick skull. Patricia was hyperventilating. She looked from me to Jamal, her eyes wide with absolute terror. How long have you been planning this? Bradley croaked, his voice a raspy whisper. How long have you been plotting against us both? Jamal. Jamal offered a smile containing zero warmth. I did not plot against us. Bradley, I protected the one who deserved it. 12 months ago, while you finalized your fraudulent divorce and celebrated with Audrey. My wife Rachel and I sat in a hospital room across the city. We sat with Natalie while she recovered from a hemorrhagic miscarriage you left her to endure alone. Patricia gasped. Rachel knew about this. My daughter knew. Rachel knew everything, Jamal stated, his voice a lethal rumble. She knew her brother was a coward who abandoned his wife. She knew Audrey was a manipulative parasite. Rachel held Natalie's hand while she cried for the child she lost. I stood at the foot of that bed and watched a loyal woman get discarded like trash because her husband was too busy covering up corporate theft. That was the exact moment our alliance formed. I nodded, stepping forward. You thought I was broken, Bradley. You thought your psychological warfare destroyed my ability to fight. But while you popped champagne with Audrey Jamal and I drafted a comprehensive investigative strategy, you handed a federal prosecutor and a forensic accountant the ultimate motivation to dismantle your existence. You have no jurisdiction here. Bradley spat, hands shaking violently. You are a federal attorney. You cannot investigate your brother-in-law without a conflict of interest. You are bluffing. Jamal laughed. You truly are a spectacular amateur. Did you honestly believe I would jeopardize my career to take down a fraudster like you? I did not investigate you personally. I facilitated the introduction between an elite forensic accountant and the federal agencies who needed her expertise. Natalie did the tracking. I just guided her on exactly which federal statutes you violated so she could build an airtight dossier for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Jamal stepped closer, forcing the CEO against the doors. Let us review the charges. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison per count. You executed 47 separate wire transfers to your Cayman Island shell company. That is 47 individual counts. But we are not finished. Jamal continued, his voice relentless. Section 1956, money laundering, adds another 20 years per count. You deliberately disguised the location and source of those funds to purchase luxury real estate and vehicles for your mistress. You funneled stolen venture capital through international borders. The digital footprint you left behind was so incredibly obvious that the federal agents reviewing Natalie's dossier laughed out loud. Patricia lunged forward, her manicured nails digging into Jamal's expensive jacket. Jamal, please. You cannot do this. He is your brother-in-law. He is family. You are a lawyer. You can talk to the prosecutors and negotiate a settlement. We will pay the money back. We will sell the house. We will do whatever it takes. Jamal stared at her trembling fingers until she slowly released his jacket. You still do not understand the magnitude of what is happening, Jamal said, smoothing his lapel. You cannot negotiate away federal wire fraud. You cannot simply write a check to the Department of Justice and ask for a mulligan. The United States government does not care about your aristocratic pedigree. They care that your son stole millions from powerful investors. He is not a criminal. Patricia sobbed, tears breaking her mask. He made a mistake. Audrey pressured him. She manipulated him into taking the money. I stepped in. Audrey is a sociopath. Patricia. But Bradley authorized the transfers. Bradley signed the sworn affidavits committing perjury during our divorce mediation. Audrey may have been the catalyst, but your son built the bomb and detonated it himself. Bradley slid down the door until he sat on the floor. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His perfectly styled hair a disheveled mess. He looked exactly like a terrified child caught stealing. How did you access the offshore accounts? Bradley whispered. Cayman banks have strict privacy laws. You could not subpoena them without a federal judge, and a judge would not issue a subpoena without probable cause. You are right, I said smoothly. A judge requires probable cause, which is exactly why I did not start with the banks. I started with your personal devices. Do you remember insisting on keeping our shared cloud storage active for 3 months after the divorce so you could seamlessly transfer your files? You thought I was too depressed to monitor the network traffic. I watched every single automated backup you executed. I captured your encrypted passwords, two-factor authentication logs, and daily correspondence with your overseas wealth managers. Jamal nodded. Once Natalie handed me the decrypted communications establishing probable cause was effortless. The federal judge signed the subpoenas in under 10 minutes. The Cayman Bank surrendered your transaction histories within 48 hours to avoid international sanctions. Chomnayan. Snorts. Your fortress of privacy was a complete illusion. Bradley buried his face in his hands. The reality of his impending incarceration broke his mind. He was going to lose the company, the money, the cars, and his freedom. He was going to spend the best years of his life in a federal penitentiary. And the most beautiful part of this entire operation, Jamal added, his voice dripping with absolute satisfaction, is that the final nail in your coffin did not even come from the federal government. It came from the exact man you are trying to impress today, before Bradley could process what Jamal meant. The distinct mechanical chime of the hospital elevator echoed down the corridor once again. The heavy silver doors glided apart with a soft hiss. The hallway, previously suffocating under the weight of Jamal's threats, instantly grew colder. Stepping across the threshold was Vincent. At 48 years old, he was a billionaire venture capitalist, a man who dismantled empires with the casual flick of a pen. He did not walk, but advanced, claiming the space with the undeniable gravity of an apex predator entering a cage full of cornered mice. Vincent wore a bespoke charcoal suit that lacked the flashy arrogance of Bradley's attire. His clothing was a masterclass in understated power, devoid of loud labels, but screaming of wealth that could buy everyone on this floor 10 times over. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly cropped, his jawline sharp, and his pale gray eyes held the terrifying stillness of a man who had never lost a negotiation. He carried no briefcase. He had no entourage. True power never required props, and he knew it perfectly. Bradley scrambled up from the polished floor the second he recognized the man emerging from the elevator. The sheer panic that had paralyzed him evaporated, replaced by a sickening, desperate surge of toxic ego. In his fractured narcissistic mind, he saw Vincent not as the executioner, but as a lifeline. He genuinely believed his primary investor had cleared his schedule and traveled to the hospital solely to congratulate his favorite tech visionary on the birth of his heir. Bradley frantically smoothed down the wrinkled front of his designer shirt, aggressively adjusting his collar, and shooting a triumphant, venomous glare toward me and Jamal. He thought he had just been rescued. He believed the presence of a billionaire would force the federal prosecutor to back down and show absolute deference. Vincent Bradley exclaimed, his voice cracking slightly, before he forced it into a booming register of manufactured masculine camaraderie. You actually came. I cannot believe you made the trip down here today. Bradley lunged forward, closing the distance with eager, pathetic strides. He thrust his right hand out a sweaty offering to the man who funded his entire fraudulent existence. Thank you so much for coming to see the baby, Vincent. Audrey is resting in the suite right now, but she is going to be thrilled that you took time to visit my son. Vincent did not slow his pace. He did not break his stride, and he most certainly did not raise his hand to meet Bradley's outstretched palm. He walked directly past Bradley as if the younger man were nothing more than a transparent gust of wind. Bradley's eager smile froze his arm left hanging suspended in the empty air, the brutal public rejection acting like a violent physical slap across his stunned face. Patricia, completely misreading the lethal temperature of the room, decided this was her moment to secure her family's social standing. She quickly stepped forward, smoothing her cashmere sweater and offering a dazzling, sycophantic smile. Mr. Vincent, Patricia purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I am Patricia Bradley's mother. We are simply overjoyed that you are here to celebrate the continuation of our family line. The baby is a perfect, beautiful boy. I know Bradley considers you a mentor, and having you here validates everything he has built. Vincent finally stopped walking. He slowly turned his head to look at Patricia. He did not speak a single word. He simply leveled his pale gray eyes at her. The look was utterly devoid of human warmth. It was the detached clinical stare of a slaughterhouse operator examining cattle. Patricia's artificial smile instantly collapsed under the sheer crushing weight of his gaze. She physically recoiled, taking 2 rapid steps backward, until her shoulders hit the wall, her survival instincts finally overriding her arrogant delusions. Having silenced the matriarch without uttering a single syllable, Vincent shifted his attention. He looked past the humiliated mother and the trembling son, locking eyes directly with Jamal and me. The atmosphere in the corridor shifted drastically. Vincent offered a single microscopic nod of his head. It was a subtle gesture, completely imperceptible to Bradley and Patricia, but it carried the weight of a signed contract. It was the professional acknowledgement between the architect of the financial trap and the operatives who perfectly executed it. Jamal returned the nod with equal brevity. I maintained my steady posture, feeling a profound surge of vindication. Vincent had hired me blindly through encrypted channels 6 months ago, trusting my forensic expertise to track the millions bleeding from his portfolio. Seeing him stand here confirmed that every late night I spent decrypting offshore accounts had been entirely worth it. Bradley, unable to process the total rejection and desperate to reclaim the narrative, awkwardly lowered his outstretched hand. He let out a nervous, high-pitched chuckle that echoed pitifully in the dead silence. Vincent, Bradley stammered, his voice dripping with forced levity. I know the timing is a bit chaotic, obviously. We have some extended family drama happening out here in the hallway, but Audrey is just inside. I can go tell the nurses to prep the baby for visitors. I know you want to see the brand new boy. Vincent slowly rotated his entire body to fully face Bradley. The billionaire stood perfectly still, his 2 hands resting comfortably in his trouser pockets. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, resonant baritone that commanded absolute silence. It held absolutely no anger, no joy, and 0 compassion. It was the cold voice of a man executing a flawless, premeditated, corporate hostile takeover today. I am certainly not here to visit your son, Bradley, Vincent stated softly, letting the syllables slice through the thick hospital air. I am here to correct a massive, incredibly expensive misunderstanding regarding exactly who this new child actually belongs to right now. Vincent did not wait for Bradley to process his chilling statement. The billionaire moved with swift, calculated precision. He reached inside the breast pocket of his bespoke jacket and withdrew a thick, folded document printed on heavy, watermarked paper. He did not hand it over politely. He stepped directly into Bradley's personal space and slapped the thick packet flat against the center of Bradley's chest. The sharp smack of heavy paper against crisp cotton echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. Bradley gasped, his hands flying up instinctively to catch the document before it fell to the floor. His fingers trembled as he gripped the thick edges. He looked down at the paper, then back up at Vincent, his eyes wide with frantic, uncomprehending panic. He looked exactly like a man who had just been handed his own death warrant, but lacked the courage to read the charges. "Read it," Vincent commanded, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that demanded absolute obedience. "Read it aloud. Bradley, let your mother and your former wife hear exactly what kind of legacy you have been bragging about all morning." Bradley fumbled with the seal. His hands were shaking so violently that he nearly dropped the packet twice. He finally managed to pull the thick medical report from the envelope. He unfolded the pages, his bloodshot eyes scanning the bold black text printed across the top. The document bore the official crest of a highly exclusive, private genetic testing facility located in Switzerland. Bradley swallowed hard, his throat making a loud clicking sound. "Prenatal non-invasive paternity test," he read, his voice cracking into a pathetic, breathless wheeze. "Keep reading," Vincent instructed coldly. "Read the names, read the results." Bradley's eyes darted further down the page. The color completely vanished from his face, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. His jaw dropped open and his breathing turned into shallow, rapid gasps. He stared at the paper as if the words printed on it were physically burning his eyes. He shook his head slowly from side to side, a silent, desperate denial of the reality staring him right in the face. "What does it say?" Patricia demanded, stepping forward and attempting to snatch the paper from her son's trembling hands. "Bradley, what is that document? Tell me what it says right now." Bradley could not speak. The psychological shock had completely paralyzed his vocal cords. He just stood there staring blankly at the medical laboratory results that shattered his entire universe. "Since your son has suddenly lost his ability to speak, I will gladly summarize the findings for you," Patricia Vincent said smoothly, never breaking his predatory gaze from Bradley's shattered face. "The document your son is holding is an airtight, legally admissible prenatal DNA test. It was conducted 6 weeks ago, using a fetal blood sample extracted under highly secure, entirely private medical supervision. The probability of paternity is 99.9%. Patricia let out a shaky breath of relief, completely missing the incoming devastation. "Well, of course it is," she snapped, her aristocratic arrogance returning for one final foolish moment. "We never doubted the child belonged to my son. Audrey is a devoted woman. You are making a scene over absolutely nothing." Vincent tilted his head, a dark, dangerous amusement flashing in his pale gray eyes. "You misunderstand, Patricia. The probability of paternity is absolute, but the name of the confirmed biological father listed on that certified document is not Bradley. The father of the child currently resting in that VIP suite is me." Patricia froze. Her mouth hung open. She looked at Vincent, then at Bradley, waiting for someone to scream that this was a sick, twisted joke. But Bradley remained perfectly silent, staring at the paper that confirmed his absolute ruin. "You see, Bradley," Vincent continued, his voice echoing with lethal precision. "I met Audrey 18 months ago at a charity gala in downtown Seattle. She was beautiful, charming, and possessed an insatiable appetite for luxury. We enjoyed a very brief, highly entertaining arrangement. However, I am a man who heavily guards his personal wealth. I do not buy mansions for casual companions, and I certainly do not merge my private assets with temporary entertainment. Vincent took a slow, deliberate step closer, forcing Bradley to press his back against the maternity ward doors again. Audrey realized very quickly that she was never going to secure a permanent pipeline to my billions, Vincent explained. She needed someone else to fund her extravagant lifestyle. She needed a man with a massive ego, a fragile sense of masculinity, and direct access to a significant pool of liquid capital. She needed a highly convenient, incredibly arrogant financial mule. So she found you. Bradley let out a pathetic whimpering sound. He clutched the DNA results to his chest as if the paper could somehow shield him from the brutal truth. I funded your startup. Bradley, Vincent said, driving the psychological knife deeper. I gave you the venture capital. You thought you were a generational tech genius. You thought Audrey looked at you and saw a visionary leader. She did not. She looked at you and saw a gullible, insecure target. She convinced you that she was your devoted muse. She manipulated you into destroying your marriage and embezzling my investment funds to buy her the houses, the cars, and the designer wardrobe that I refused to purchase for her. Vincent leaned in, dropping his voice into a chilling register. And the truly pathetic part. Bradley, is that while you were sitting in your office feeling like a corporate titan, Audrey was inviting me over to the luxury waterfront property you purchased with stolen money. She was sleeping with me in the exact same bed you bought for her. Patricia let out a loud, strangled wail, pressing her hands against her temples as she staggered backward. No, she shrieked. No, this cannot be happening. This is a lie. Audrey loves him. Audrey gave us a grandson. Audrey got careless. Vincent corrected sharply, silencing Patricia instantly. She got pregnant. She panicked. She knew I would demand a DNA test immediately, and she knew I would cut her off entirely. But she also knew you, Bradley. She knew your mother was desperately pressuring you for an heir. She knew that if she pinned the pregnancy on you, you would be locked in forever. You would continue to drain your company dry to provide for her and the baby. Bradley slowly slid down the heavy wooden doors, his legs completely giving out under the crushing weight of his monumental failure. He hit the polished floor with a dull thud. But I am a man who trusts nothing and verifies everything, Vincent concluded, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I had my private medical team extract a DNA sample weeks ago. That child is my blood. Bradley, you are nothing but a discarded pawn who financed his own complete destruction. Let that reality sink in before we discuss the stolen millions. Vincent stood over the broken CEO, his expression a mask of absolute unforgiving authority. The DNA results lay crumpled on the hospital floor beside Bradley, a physical representation of the catastrophic delusion he had been living. But the paternity revelation was only the prelude to the complete dismantling of his corporate identity. You thought you were outsmarting everyone. Bradley, Vincent said, his voice dropping into a chilling conversational register. You believed you were a financial mastermind executing a flawless embezzlement strategy. But let me be perfectly clear about your role in this operation. You were never the architect. You were merely the mule. Bradley slowly raised his head, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. He looked from Vincent to me, desperately trying to find a flaw in the logic, a loophole he could squeeze through. But there were no loopholes left. I stepped forward, holding my encrypted tablet ready to deliver the forensic evidence that would seal his fate. Let us review the anatomy of your brilliant shell company scam, I stated, my voice echoing down the corridor. You authorized the transfer of $3.2 million from your Series B venture capital fund into an entity named Apex Horizon Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. You thought that because you used your offshore wealth manager to execute the wire transfers, the transaction was untraceable. You assumed you were cleverly hiding marital assets from me while securing a secret nest egg for yourself and Audrey. I swiped my tablet, projecting the data points in my mind as I spoke. But you failed to recognize a fundamental principle of financial forensics. Bradley. Capital never simply disappears. It leaves a digital fingerprint. And the fingerprint on Apex Horizon Holdings led directly back to a very familiar beneficiary. Vincent took over, seamlessly picking up the thread of the corporate espionage narrative. When Natalie brought the preliminary audit findings to my attention, he explained we began tracking the outflow of the embezzled funds. We discovered that Apex Horizon Holdings was not a dormant shell company waiting for your retirement. It was an incredibly active purchasing vehicle. Over the past 10 months, while you were busy trying to keep your failing startup afloat, Audrey was aggressively liquidating those funds. Bradley's breath hitched. He stared at Vincent, his mind struggling to process the implications of what the billionaire was saying. She bought a $2.5 million waterfront property in Bellevue. Vincent detailed, listing the assets with clinical detachment. She purchased a fully loaded custom Mercedes SUV. She acquired over $400,000 in high-end jewelry and designer apparel. And she did not purchase a single one of these assets under your name or the name of your startup. Every single deed, title, and receipt was registered exclusively to Audrey. You funded her entire independent lifestyle, I added, twisting the knife. You thought you were buying her loyalty and securing a future for your supposed son. But Audrey was systematically draining the Cayman account to build her own personal empire, entirely insulated from your impending financial collapse. Bradley let out a pathetic, strangled sound. He scrambled backward until his shoulders hit the wall, his hands gripping his hair as the reality of his profound stupidity washed over him. She told me the money had to be secured offshore to avoid tax liabilities, Bradley babbled, his voice cracking with desperation. She said the real estate investments were a strategy to protect our assets from the divorce settlement. She said we were building a future together. She said exactly what she needed to say to ensure you kept signing the wire authorizations, Vincent corrected sharply. Audrey is an exceptionally skilled manipulator. Bradley. She identified your towering ego and your desperate need for validation. She recognized that you would do anything to maintain the illusion of absolute success. So, she played the role of the devoted, admiring partner while simultaneously siphoning the lifeblood out of your company. Vincent leaned down, resting his forearms on his knees, bringing his face level with the terrified CEO. Did you honestly believe a woman who would forge a medical diagnosis and poison your pregnant wife would suddenly develop a strong moral compass when it came to your finances? Vincent asked, his voice dripping with incredulous disdain. You handed the keys to the vault to a proven sociopath. Bradley, you made it incredibly easy for her to rob you blind because you were too arrogant to ever question her loyalty. Bradley hyperventilated, his chest heaving as the walls of the corridor seemed to close in around him. He looked at Patricia, who was standing frozen, tears streaming down her face as she finally comprehended the magnitude of her son's failure. The golden child she had bragged about was not a genius. He was a colossal, easily manipulated fool. I watched Bradley panic, feeling a profound sense of vindictive satisfaction. The man who had gaslighted me, who had belittled my career and destroyed my mental health, was currently experiencing a psychological implosion. You are bankrupt. Bradley, I stated, delivering the final fatal diagnosis of his corporate health. Your startup is functionally insolvent. You have violated dozens of federal securities laws, breached your fiduciary duties to your investors, and committed egregious wire fraud. The $3.2 million you stole is gone. Liquidated by Audrey. You have absolutely zero liquid capital left to defend yourself against the impending federal indictment. Bradley clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut as if he could physically block out the reality of his complete financial ruin. He let out a low, guttural moan, rocking back and forth against the heavy wooden door of the maternity suite. The shell company scam was not your masterpiece, Bradley, Vincent concluded, standing up and straightening his bespoke jacket. It was Audrey's masterpiece. You were just the incredibly convenient, remarkably gullible pawn she used to execute it. And now that she has extracted every single dollar of value from you, she is going to discard you the exact same way you discarded Natalie. Vincent looked at me as silent confirmation passing between us. The financial dismantling was complete. The illusion of Bradley's wealth and genius had been utterly shattered. But the final, most devastating truth was still waiting to be delivered. And it was time for Jamal to execute the medical checkmate. The silence in the corridor was absolute, a heavy vacuum waiting for the final blow to fall. Patricia suddenly broke it. She lunged forward with a sharp, desperate cry, her hands waving wildly in the air as if she could physically bat away the truth. "It is a lie!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical, high-pitched shriek. "That DNA test is a complete fabrication. You forged it. Vincent, you are trying to humiliate my family and steal my grandson. Bradley is the father. Audrey is a good, traditional girl who loves my son. That baby is the heir to our family legacy, and I will not let you stand in this hospital and spread these vicious, disgusting lies." She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she clung to the shattered remains of her aristocratic delusion. She looked at Bradley, begging him to stand up and fight, begging him to defend his manhood and his child. But Bradley remained slumped against the door, his eyes vacant and hollow. Jamal stepped forward, moving with a calm, deliberate grace that contrasted sharply with Patricia's manic desperation. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue with her. He simply walked over to a small stainless steel medical cart resting against the corridor wall and gently placed his black leather briefcase on top of it. "You possess a truly astonishing capacity for denial, Patricia," Jamal said smoothly. The sharp metallic click of the briefcase latches echoed down the quiet hallway, snapping open like the chamber of a loaded weapon. "You reject Vincent's DNA test because it shatters the perfect image you have constructed for your son. But as a federal prosecutor, I do not rely on a single piece of evidence. I prefer establishing an undeniable historical pattern of facts." Jamal reached into the pristine interior of his briefcase. He bypassed the thick legal dossiers and federal warrants, pulling out an old yellowed manila envelope. It was heavily sealed with faded medical tape looking entirely out of place among the crisp, modern legal documents. "Vincent brought the current genetic reality," Jamal stated, holding the envelope up to the harsh fluorescent lights. "But I brought the historical context because the truth about that baby in the maternity suite was decided a very long time ago." Jamal broke the seal, the sound of tearing paper slicing through the tension. He pulled out a stack of medical records printed on aging, off-white hospital letterhead. He adjusted his suit jacket, assuming the undeniable posture of a man delivering a final damning verdict in a court of law. "Bradley," Jamal called out, forcing the broken CEO to lift his head. "When you were 18 years old, just weeks before you graduated high school, you contracted a severe case of the mumps. Do you remember that Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing? He gave a weak, confused nod. Yes, he rasped, his voice barely audible. I was hospitalized for 4 days with a high fever, but I recovered. The doctors said I was perfectly fine. The doctors told you what your mother instructed them to tell you." Jamal corrected him, his voice devoid of any warmth. He looked down at the documents in his hands. "These are your authentic, unredacted medical records from Seattle Presbyterian Hospital, dated exactly 15 years ago. Patient name: Bradley. Attending physician: Dr. Eris Thorne. Do you want to know what Dr. Thorne actually wrote in your discharge papers?" Patricia let out a strangled, terrified gasp. All the manic energy drained from her body in an instant. Her eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. She took a step toward Jamal, her hands reaching out in a pathetic, trembling gesture of surrender. "No," Patricia pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Jamal, please, do not read that. It is family business. You have no right. I have every right, Jamal replied coldly, brushing her trembling hand away. He turned his attention back to the records, his voice projecting clearly down the hall. The patient suffered severe bilateral orchitis as a direct complication of the mumps infection. The resulting testicular atrophy caused massive, irreversible tissue damage. The final diagnosis is primary infertility. Complete azoospermia. Jamal lowered the paper, fixing Bradley with a stare that offered no quarter. 0 sperm count. Bradley, you are completely biologically incapable of fathering a child. You have been sterile since you were a teenager. Your condition is permanent and utterly irreversible. Bradley's jaw dropped. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked from Jamal to the yellowed medical records, his mind struggling to process a truth that fundamentally altered his entire existence. That makes no sense, Bradley stammered, shaking his head frantically. Mom handled my discharge. She met with Dr. Thorne. She drove me home and told me my blood work was clear. She told me I had a clean bill of health. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at Patricia. She was trembling violently, her face buried in her hands, unable to meet her son's eyes. She lied to you. Bradley, Jamal said, his voice dropping into a harsh, unforgiving register. In Patricia's wealthy, status-obsessed social circle, a son who cannot produce an heir is considered defective. She could not stomach the idea of her golden boy having a biological flaw. So she intercepted the doctor. She used her privilege and her money to have these records sealed and handed directly to her. She hid your infertility from you to protect her own aristocratic vanity. I stepped forward, my blood running cold as the absolute depravity of Patricia's actions fully crystallized in my mind. The financial theft was a crime of greed, but this was a crime of pure, unadulterated malice. You knew, I said, my voice shaking with a deep, volcanic rage. I stared at Patricia, wanting to burn a hole straight through her cashmere sweater. You knew he was sterile this entire time. Patricia lowered her hands, her face streaked with ruined makeup, looking like a cornered rat. I was protecting my son. She sobbed, her voice defensive and shrill. I was protecting his manhood. A man needs to feel whole. I did it out of love. Love. I shouted the word, tearing from my throat. You watched me endure years of invasive fertility treatments. You watched me take excruciating daily hormone injections that left my body bruised and exhausted. You sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinners and smiled while your son screamed at me, blaming my body for our failure to conceive. You let him call me barren. You let him tear away my dignity and destroy my self-worth, knowing the entire time that I was perfectly healthy and your son was the one who was biologically incapable. Patricia flinched, shrinking back against the wall. You were an outsider, she muttered, revealing the true rotting core of her prejudice. You were a disposable vessel. My son's confidence was more important than your feelings. Bradley let out a hollow, agonizing sound that was half laugh and half sob. He looked at his mother, the woman he had worshipped, the woman whose approval he had sought his entire life. The full, catastrophic weight of her deception crashed down upon him. You did this, Bradley whispered, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at Patricia. If you had told me the truth 15 years ago, I would have known Audrey was lying the second she claimed she was pregnant. I would have known immediately that she was cheating on me. I would never have stolen the money. I would never have divorced Natalie. He grabbed his hair, pulling at the roots as he sobbed uncontrollably on the hospital floor. You did not protect me. Mom, your lies set me up to be conned. You let a sociopath ruin my entire life just to protect your precious ego. Patricia fell to her knees, weeping hysterically, reaching out to her broken son. But Bradley violently slapped her hands away, shrinking back from her as if her touch were acidic. The aristocratic matriarch was finally seeing the true cost of her vanity. She had manufactured a lie so massive. It had consumed her entire family, turning her golden child into a convicted felon and a public joke. Bradley sat paralyzed on the cold linoleum. The sheer magnitude of his own stupidity was a physical weight pressing down on his chest until his lungs burned for oxygen. For his entire adult life, he had operated under the absolute certainty that he was the smartest man in any room. He had believed he was a visionary, a titan of industry destined for greatness, and a virile patriarch meant to establish a dynasty. In the span of 20 minutes, that entire identity had been violently ripped apart, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. He stared at his hands, watching them tremble uncontrollably. Those were the same hands that had signed the fraudulent divorce papers. The same hands that had authorized the transfer of millions of dollars into offshore accounts controlled by a sociopath. He had felt so incredibly powerful making those decisions. He had felt like a predator shedding a weak wife for a devoted partner. Now, looking at his shaking fingers, he realized he was never the predator. He was the prey. His eyes darted toward the heavy wooden doors of the maternity suite. Behind those doors lay Audrey, the woman who had played him with terrifying perfection. The humiliation burned through his veins like acid. Audrey had not looked at him and seen a brilliant tech founder. She had looked at him and seen an arrogant Mark. A man so blinded by his own ego that he would eagerly finance her lavish lifestyle while she shared his bed with a billionaire. He had embezzled his investors' capital, risking decades in a federal penitentiary simply to act as Audrey's personal ATM. He had proudly paraded around the hospital, boasting about his newborn son, completely oblivious to the fact that he was celebrating another man's DNA. He was not a father. He was a financial mule, serving as a human shield for a gold digger's grandest scam. A harsh sob tore from Bradley's throat as his gaze shifted from the maternity doors to me. I stood beside Jamal and Vincent, my expression utterly devoid of pity. Bradley looked at me, and for the very first time the dense fog of his narcissism evaporated, allowing the brutal truth to pierce his consciousness. I had loved him. I had been his fiercest advocate, his actual partner. I had endured years of grueling fertility treatments, injecting myself with hormones, all while carrying the immense guilt of our failure to conceive, and while I had been fighting to build a family with him. He had been punishing me for a biological defect that belonged entirely to him. He had allowed me to hate my own body. He had thrown Audrey's forged infertility diagnosis in my face, using my deepest vulnerability to shatter my sanity. And worse, when Audrey had poisoned me, when she had murdered the only child we had miraculously managed to conceive. He had used my catastrophic grief to rob me blind. He had discarded the only woman on earth who had possessed the intellect to protect him and the loyalty to stand by him. He had traded gold for dirt. "Oh, Bradley, please," Patricia whimpered. The sound of his mother's voice snapped his attention back to the woman kneeling on the floor beside him. Patricia reached out her hands, shaking her perfect manicure, looking grotesque against the backdrop of the devastation she had engineered. She leaned forward, attempting to pull his head against her chest, attempting to soothe him exactly as she had done when he was a little boy. She wanted to wrap him in the suffocating blanket of her toxic maternal protection, to whisper that everything would be all right, that they would fix this together. "Do not touch me," Bradley growled. Patricia froze, but her desperate need to control the situation pushed her forward. She reached for his face, tears streaking through her expensive foundation. "Sweetheart, listen to me. We will hire the best defense attorneys. We will fight the federal charges. You are still my golden boy. You are still a brilliant man. We just need to stick together." Bradley's reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The decades of conditioned respect for his mother evaporated in a volatile flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. As Patricia's fingers brushed against his cheek, Bradley let out a visceral roar. He threw his arms up violently, shoving his mother away with a force that sent her sprawling backward across the polished hospital floor. "Get your hands off of me," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking, tearing through the quiet corridor with agonizing volume. "You did this! You destroyed my entire life!" Patricia gasped, scrambling to sit up, her eyes wide with shock at the physical rejection. "Bradley, I am your mother. I was trying to protect your manhood. I was trying to protect your pride." "My pride!" Bradley shouted, scrambling to his feet. He towered over her, his fists clenched at his sides. "You call this protecting my pride? You let me believe I was a functioning man. You let me believe my wife was broken. You sat at my dining room table and watched me humiliate Natalie for years, knowing all along that I was the defective one. You let me fall straight into the trap of a sociopathic gold digger because you were too obsessed with our aristocratic image to tell me the medical truth." He stepped closer to her, his voice dripping with venom. "If you had just been honest, I would still have my company, I would still have my freedom, I would still have the woman who actually loved me. You did not protect me. You handed me a loaded gun, pointed it directly at my head, and told me to pull the trigger." Patricia covered her face, weeping loudly, the sound echoing miserably against the sterile walls. The great family matriarch was reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor, publicly rejected by the very son she had sacrificed everything to mold. Bradley turned away from her in absolute disgust. He looked at the ceiling, letting out a hollow, broken laugh that morphed into a sound of pure agony. The illusion of his elite family was completely eradicated. There was no wealth, no legacy, no visionary genius, and no loyal family unit. There was only a fraudulent CEO, a manipulative mother, and the impending reality of federal prison. The family unit had not just fractured, it had been entirely pulverized, leaving nothing but dust and devastating regret in the middle of the hospital corridor. Bradley's physical collapse was total, his body curling inward as if trying to shrink away from the harsh reality pressing down on him. The realization that his mother had orchestrated his ruin was a blow from which he would never fully recover. But the financial and legal reckoning was far from over, and I was not about to let him escape the full weight of his own actions. I stepped over the scattered medical records, moving past Patricia's sobbing form to stand directly in front of Bradley. He flinched, expecting another devastating revelation about his personal life. What he got instead was the complete demolition of his professional existence. "Do you remember the night you proudly announced Vincent's investment?" "Bradley," I asked, my voice cutting through Patricia's wailing. "You came home and declared that you had secured the backing of the most rigorous, demanding venture capitalist in the industry. You said Vincent's investment was proof of your unparalleled genius." Bradley squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clamped tightly over his ears. He did not want to hear it. He wanted the nightmare to stop. But I was not stopping. "What you failed to understand," I continued, my words sharp and methodical, "is why a man like Vincent is so successful. He does not simply hand over millions of dollars and walk away. He monitors his investments with surgical precision. And 6 months ago, Vincent noticed an irregularity in your burn rate." Vincent remained perfectly still, his cold gray eyes fixed on Bradley, offering silent confirmation of my words. He suspected embezzlement. I explained, pacing slowly in front of him. But he needed absolute proof before executing a hostile takeover. He needed someone who could dismantle your accounting structure from the inside out. Someone who understood the architecture of your specific financial ecosystem. He needed an elite forensic auditor who operated with total anonymity. Bradley lowered his hands, his bloodshot eyes darting toward me. The realization was slow, sluggish, struggling to penetrate his shattered ego. "He hired you," Bradley rasped, his voice barely recognizable. "You were the auditor." "I was the auditor," I confirmed, letting the triumph ring clear in my voice. "Vincent contracted me through an encrypted intermediary. He gave me unrestricted backdoor access to your entire corporate network. I had the keys to your kingdom." Bradley. And for the past 6 months, I have been living inside your ledgers. Patricia stopped crying, her head snapping up. She looked from me to Vincent, her mind desperately trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the operation that had been conducted right under their noses. You thought you were so clever, I said, leaning down slightly. You thought those offshore shell companies were impenetrable, but you left digital breadcrumbs everywhere. I tracked the initial $3.2 million transfer to Apex Horizon Holdings. I audited the secondary trusts in Bermuda. I followed the capital as Audrey liquidated it to purchase real estate and luxury vehicles. I matched the routing numbers, cross-referenced the IP addresses you used to authorize the wires, and mapped out the entire fraudulent infrastructure. Bradley stared at me, his mouth agape. The woman he had dismissed as a boring, unambitious accountant had systematically dismantled his empire while he was busy playing house with his mistress. I did not just find the money, Bradley, I continued, my voice dropping into a deadly conversational tone. I documented the intent. I found the emails where Audrey pressured you to expedite the transfers. I found the encrypted messages where you discussed hiding the assets from the divorce mediator. I compiled a comprehensive, airtight dossier of your financial crimes. You set me up. Bradley choked out a sudden, pathetic surge of anger, replacing his terror. You orchestrated this entire thing just to destroy me. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed down the hallway. I did not set you up, Bradley. I simply turned on the lights. You built the fraudulent structure. You authorized the illegal transfers. You committed perjury. I just provided the federal government with a very detailed map of your profound stupidity. Jamal stepped forward, taking his place beside me. And it was a spectacular map, he added, his deep voice resonating with authority. When Natalie delivered the final dossier to my office, the federal agents reviewing the case were genuinely impressed. They do not often see embezzlement structured with such spectacular incompetence. Bradley looked at Jamal, the threat of federal prosecution crashing back down on him. You cannot use that evidence, he pleaded, his voice cracking. It was obtained illegally. It was a breach of privacy. Jamal smiled a cold, predatory expression that offered no comfort. You really should have consulted better attorneys. Bradley. Vincent is the primary investor. He holds a controlling stake in your startup. He has every legal right to audit his own company's finances. The evidence Natalie gathered is completely admissible in federal court. You have absolutely no legal shield. Legal. The arrogant CEO had been completely outmaneuvered. He had spent his entire life believing he was the smartest man in the room, relying on his mother's wealth and his own misplaced confidence to shield him from consequences. But he had finally encountered people who operated on a completely different level. You are going to lose everything, Bradley, I stated, delivering the final verdict. The company, the money, the houses, the cars, all of it. Vincent is executing a hostile takeover as we speak. He is seizing control of the startup and liquidating the remaining assets to recover his stolen capital. Bradley looked at Vincent, a desperate, silent plea for mercy in his eyes. But the billionaire simply stared back, his expression as unyielding as a glacier. You stole from me, Bradley Vincent said softly, his words carrying the weight of a death sentence. And I am a man who always collects his debts. The realization hit Bradley with the force of a physical blow. He was not just facing federal charges. He was facing the wrath of a billionaire who had the resources to ensure his complete and utter ruin. He was going to be stripped of every single thing that gave his life meaning, leaving him with nothing but the devastating knowledge that his mother's lie and his own ego had orchestrated his downfall. And the process, I added, pulling up my encrypted tablet one final time, has already begun. I tapped the glass surface of my encrypted tablet, bringing the screen to full brightness. The cool blue light reflected in Bradley's wide, bloodshot eyes as I turned the device toward him. The dashboard displayed a highly secure real-time interface connecting directly to the Federal Financial Oversight Network. It was the same tablet Patricia had mocked just 20 minutes earlier when she accused me hovering like a stray dog. Now that specific device held the absolute keys to her entire existence and the immediate destruction of her aristocratic legacy. Look closely. Bradley. I instructed, holding the high-resolution screen perfectly steady so he could not look away. I want you to see exactly what an elite forensic accountant can achieve when granted absolute federal jurisdiction. These are live feeds monitoring the routing numbers associated with every single financial institution you and your mother actively use. Domestic checking accounts, corporate payroll pipelines, offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands, and your mother's prestigious high-yield investment trusts. Bradley squinted at the screen, his breathing ragged and shallow. He read the names of the banks, his dry lips moving silently as he processed the horrifying information scrolling past his face. Next to every single account name sat a glaring bright red lock icon. Beside those heavily secured icons, the current available balances were displayed in bold black text. $0. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning. I continued, my voice carrying the steady, relentless rhythm of a metronome. Jamal and I submitted the final injunction to the federal magistrate. Given the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of international wire fraud and gross embezzlement of venture capital, the judge did not hesitate for a single second. He signed the emergency order authorizing an immediate, comprehensive freeze on all your associated assets. Jamal stepped forward, his leather briefcase hanging at his side, projecting the immovable, crushing force of the federal government. Under the federal money laundering statutes, Jamal explained, his voice booming down the sterile corridor. The Department of Justice possesses the absolute authority to seize any and all assets suspected of being purchased with or used to conceal illicit funds. We cast a very wide net. Bradley, we froze the corporate accounts. We froze the Cayman Island shell entities. We froze the pristine trust funds your mother manages. The federal government now legally controls every single penny you possess. You cannot do that. Patricia gasped, her voice trembling as she pushed herself up from the hospital floor. She leaned heavily against the wall, her expensive, designer clothes rumpled, her face a portrait of pure, aristocratic panic. The trust funds have absolutely nothing to do with Bradley's tech company. That is generational wealth. That is my personal money. You have absolutely no legal right to touch my private accounts. I turned my gaze to Patricia, feeling a profound, deep-seated sense of satisfaction washing over me. When you funnel stolen money through family trusts to help your son avoid detection. Patricia, those trusts immediately become active vehicles for federal wire fraud. I tracked the capital step by step. Bradley used your private accounts to wash $300,000 before routing it directly to Audrey. You made your generational wealth a federal crime scene. Therefore, the government seized it all. Patricia shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair falling messily into her panicked eyes. No, she insisted, digging frantically into her expensive leather handbag. You are lying. You are just trying to scare us. The bank would notify me immediately. My private wealth manager would call me the second a hold was placed. You cannot erase my money with a tablet. Check your phone, Patricia, I suggested coldly, gesturing toward her handbag. Go ahead. Log into your elite banking portal. See the reality for yourself. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her diamond-encrusted smartphone. Her manicured fingers fumbled across the glass screen as she frantically opened her banking application. The hospital corridor fell completely silent, save for the ragged sound of Bradley hyperventilating against the maternity suite doors, and the soft mechanical hum of the ceiling ventilation system. Vincent stood perfectly still, watching the total destruction of the family with the detached clinical interest of an apex predator, observing the final pathetic moments of its dying prey. Patricia held the phone close to her face, her eyes darting rapidly across the screen as the secure application loaded. The biometric scanner authenticated her identity. The loading circle spun for 2 agonizing, suffocating seconds. Then the financial dashboard materialized. Patricia let out a guttural, soul-tearing scream. It was not a simple cry of sadness or a quick gasp of shock. It was the primal, visceral shriek of a woman who watched her entire identity evaporate into thin air. The sound ripped through the sterile hallway, echoing off the polished linoleum and bouncing violently against the closed maternity doors. She stared at the digital screen, her eyes bulging, her mouth wide in absolute, unadulterated horror. "It is gone," she wailed, her voice cracking into a hysterical, broken pitch. "It is all gone. Everything is showing a zero balance. The checking, the savings, the investment portfolio. They took absolutely everything I have." She looked up from the screen, her eyes wild with feral terror. She lunged toward Jamal, her hands grasping desperately at the expensive lapels of his custom suit. "Fix it!" Patricia screamed, spittle flying from her trembling lips. "You are a lawyer. Fix this right now. You cannot leave me with nothing. I have a massive mortgage. I have country club fees. I have a high society lifestyle to maintain. You must release my money immediately." Jamal did not move an inch. He simply looked down at the frantic, pathetic woman clawing at his jacket. "I am a federal prosecutor, Patricia," he replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that offered zero comfort. "My job is to prosecute criminals, not to finance their luxury lifestyles. Your money belongs exclusively to the federal government now. It will be held indefinitely in a secure escrow account until the trial concludes, at which point it will be utilized to pay the massive fines and financial restitution your son owes to Vincent." Bradley watched his mother completely melt down, the undeniable reality of the situation finally shattering his last remaining psychological defenses. He reached into his own pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out his smartphone. He did not even need to log into his banking application. The lock screen was flooded with urgent, panicked notifications. There were frantic text messages from his chief financial officer, desperate missed calls from his offshore wealth manager, and automated red alerts from his black credit card companies indicating that his accounts had been permanently suspended due to severe federal intervention. "I have nothing," Bradley whispered, the phone slipping from his lifeless grasp and clattering loudly onto the hard hospital floor. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terror so profound it almost looked like genuine madness. "How am I supposed to hire a top-tier defense attorney? Natalie, how am I supposed to fight multiple federal charges without any money? You will be assigned a public defender," I stated, delivering the final crushing blow with surgical precision. "The exact same way every other broke, desperate criminal is assigned one. You thought you could strip me of my hard-earned assets and leave me with nothing. You thought you could weaponize my grief to line your own pockets. But the universe has a very precise way of balancing the scales. You are walking into a federal courtroom with the exact same amount of leverage you tried to leave me with. Absolutely none." Patricia collapsed against the wall, her legs giving out completely as she slid to the floor beside her broken son. The generational wealth she had weaponized against me was gone forever. They were entirely stripped of their resources, their pride and their power left to face the full, unyielding wrath of the United States justice system with completely empty pockets and permanently shattered egos. Section 16, 1,000 words. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to spotlight the absolute devastation on the floor. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the jagged, desperate wheezing coming from Bradley and the muffled, wet sobs escaping his mother. The reality of federal prison was no longer a theoretical threat hanging in the air. It was a tangible, suffocating beast that had just swallowed their entire future. The luxury cars, the waterfront estates, the country club memberships. and the meticulously curated societal standing had all been incinerated in a matter of seconds. They were entirely naked before the law, stripped of every single shield they had ever used to avoid accountability. Patricia glowing phone screen. Her perfectly applied makeup was completely ruined. Dark streaks of expensive mascara running down her cheeks and settling into the deep, terrified lines of her face. The aristocratic, untouchable matriarch who had strutted out of the maternity ward demanding my immediate removal was entirely gone. In her place was a broken, terrified woman staring directly into the dark, unforgiving abyss of destitution. She looked at Bradley, her golden boy, who was currently curled into a pathetic fetal position against the wall, incapable of forming a single coherent sentence. She realized in that exact moment that he could not save her. He could not even save himself. The brilliant tech CEO was nothing but an empty, fraudulent suit who had just gambled away her entire generational wealth on a sociopathic mistress. Patricia turned her wild, bloodshot eyes toward me. The transition from haughty predator to pathetic victim happened in a flash of pure, unadulterated desperation. She pushed herself forward, abandoning every last ounce of her carefully cultivated dignity. She crawled across the cold linoleum floor on her hands and knees. Her expensive pearl necklace swung wildly, clattering loudly against the sterile hospital tiles. Natalie Patricia wailed, her voice cracking into a ragged, pathetic screech. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and grabbed the hem of my tailored skirt. Her knuckles were stark white as she clung to the fabric as if it were a life raft in a violent storm. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely zero pity. I watched the woman who had spent years mocking my career, insulting my body, and trying to orchestrate my complete emotional destruction reduced to a groveling, weeping mess at my feet. "Please, Natalie, please," Patricia begged, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto her ruined cashmere sweater. "You cannot do this. You cannot take everything we have. We will lose the family home. We will be out on the street. You know I cannot survive in a federal prison cell. I am an old woman. I am sorry. I am so terribly sorry for everything I said to you today. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong." I stared down at the hands gripping my clothing. The sheer hypocrisy of her tears was physically revolting. "You are not sorry, Patricia," I stated, my voice echoing with glacial detachment. "You are just bankrupt. Your apologies have absolutely no value because they are entirely funded by fear. You called me a complete failure less than an hour ago. You celebrated the fact that your son divorced me. You bragged about the powerful legacy he built with a woman who actively poisoned me. You did not care if my life was destroyed as long as it kept your bank accounts full and your social calendar pristine." I took a deliberate, forceful step backward, ripping the fabric of my skirt out of her desperate grasp. "Do not touch me," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Do not ever put your hands on me again. You burned the bridge of our relationship to the ground, and now you are complaining that you cannot cross the river. You made your choices. Now you get to drown in them, deprived of my sympathy and physically repelled." Patricia spun around on her knees. She frantically searched the towering figures above her, looking for any shred of salvation. Her frantic gaze bypassed Vincent, knowing instinctively that the billionaire venture capitalist possessed zero mercy for the thieves who stole from his funds. Instead, her eyes locked directly onto Jamal quickly, the exact same man she had just attempted to banish from the hallway. The man she had continuously belittled, racially profiled, and insulted for the past 5 years. She crawled toward the federal prosecutor, her hands reaching out in a pathetic display of total supplication. "Jamal," Patricia sobbed, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. "Jamal, please listen to me. You are a powerful man. You know the federal judges. You know the prosecutors handling this specific case. You can talk to them. You can make this go away or at least negotiate a fine. We can pay it back. I swear we will find a way to pay the money back." Jamal looked down at her, his expression an impenetrable fortress of federal authority. He did not step away from her reaching hands. He simply let her wallow in her own profound humiliation. "Please, Jamal," Patricia begged, her voice descending into a hysterical, breathless whine. "He is your brother-in-law. Bradley is Rachel's brother. We are family. You are part of this family. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal penitentiary. It will destroy Rachel. It will destroy all of us. You have to protect your family." The sheer, unmitigated audacity of her using the word family made my stomach turn. For years, she had gone out of her way to remind Jamal that he would never truly belong to their elite circle. She had deliberately excluded him from family photos, seated him at the furthest ends of holiday tables, and whispered loudly to her friends about how her daughter could have married a prominent hedge fund manager instead of a government lawyer. Now facing total financial and legal annihilation, she dared to invoke the sacred bond of kinship. Bradley, witnessing his mother crawling on the floor and begging a man she openly despised, let out a pathetic broken groan. "Mom, stop," he rasped, his voice sounding like torn sandpaper. "Stop begging him. It is over." But Patricia could not stop. She ignored her broken son and kept her tear-streaked face turned upward toward the unyielding prosecutor. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest as if she were praying for divine intervention. "I will do anything." Patricia wept, her chest heaving violently under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I will publicly apologize to you. I will apologize to Natalie. I will give you whatever assets you want. Just tell the federal agents to stand down. Tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Please, Jamal. I am begging you as a mother. Show us some mercy." The entire corridor seemed to hold its collective breath. Vincent stood silently, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the pathetic spectacle unfold with cold, detached satisfaction. I looked at Jamal, knowing exactly what was running through his brilliant mind. He had endured 5 years of this woman's toxic, bigoted behavior with absolute quiet grace for the sake of his wife. He had swallowed her insults and smiled through her endless microaggressions. But today, he was wearing the badge of the federal government, and the time for turning the other cheek had officially expired. Jamal did not flinch. He did not step away or offer a comforting word to the desperate woman clutching at his legs. He stood perfectly still, allowing the heavy silence of the hospital corridor to amplify Patricia's hysterical sobbing. The aristocratic matriarch, who had spent half a decade treating him like an unwanted infection in her pristine bloodline, was now literally begging at his feet. The irony was so profound, it practically hummed in the air, slowly, deliberately. Jamal reached into the breast pocket of his impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit. He pulled out a crisp white silk handkerchief. His movements were unhurried, agonizingly precise. He looked down at Patricia, his dark eyes entirely devoid of mercy or warmth. "Please, Jamal," Patricia choked out, her voice a ragged, breathless wheeze. "I will do whatever you want. Just talk to the judge. Tell them Bradley was confused." Jamal ignored her plea. He held the silk handkerchief between 2 fingers and methodically wiped the exact spot on his trouser leg where Patricia's trembling, tear-soaked hands had just been grasping. The gesture was surgical in its disdain. He was not just cleaning his suit. He was erasing her touch, treating her desperation as something physically repulsive. Patricia froze. Her sobs hitched in her throat as she watched him meticulously fold the tainted handkerchief and slip it back into a hidden pocket. The realization of what he was doing hit her like a physical blow. The power dynamic she had relied on her entire life had completely inverted. Jamal slowly crouched down, bringing his face level with Patricia's ruined, tear-streaked makeup. He rested his forearms on his knees, his posture relaxed but radiating an overwhelming, intimidating authority. "Do you remember our wedding day, Patricia?" Jamal asked. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, quiet enough that only the people in our immediate circle could hear, but sharp enough to draw blood. Patricia blinked, her chest heaving violently. "What no? Jamal." Please. This is not the time. It is exactly the time, Jamal corrected, his tone turning to ice. Because you seem to be suffering from severe amnesia regarding our relationship. You are begging me to act like family. You want me to leverage my federal authority to protect my brother-in-law. But 5 years ago, standing in the vestibule of the country club while Rachel was getting her dress bustled, you pulled me aside. Patricia swallowed hard. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The memory she had likely buried under years of arrogant entitlement was being dragged into the harsh hospital light. You leaned in close. Jamal continued, his voice dropping into a chilling whisper that perfectly mimicked the venomous tone she had used that day. You looked at my suit. Then you looked at my skin. And you told me exactly where I stood. You said, "You can wear all the expensive suits you want, Jamal. But you will never actually belong in this family. You are just a quota my daughter is filling to feel progressive. When the money runs out, people like you always revert to your true nature." Patricia let out a strangled gasp, pressing her hands against her mouth. The words hung in the air, a toxic, bigoted echo from the past. Bradley, still slumped against the wall, groaned softly, burying his face in his knees. "You thought I forgot," Jamal stated, his eyes locking onto Patricia's panicked gaze. "You thought because I smiled for the photographs and treated your daughter like a queen, I had somehow accepted your vile, racist assessment of my character. You believed I would just swallow your microaggressions forever because I was desperate for your aristocratic validation. I did not mean it." Patricia babbled, her voice high and frantic. "I was stressed. Weddings are stressful. I love you, Jamal. You are a wonderful husband to Rachel." Jamal laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound that offered absolutely no comfort. "You do not love me, Patricia. You love the idea that I might be able to save your fraudulent son from a federal penitentiary. But here is the profound beauty of this situation. You were right about one thing that day." He leaned in an inch or closer, the sheer force of his presence pinning her to the floor. "When the money runs out, people really do revert to their true nature," Jamal whispered, throwing her exact insult back into her face with devastating precision. "Your money just ran out, Patricia. Every single dime of your generational wealth has been seized. And look at your true nature. You are not a proud, untouchable matriarch. You are a sobbing, pathetic accomplice to wire fraud begging a black man you despise to save you from the consequences of your own bottomless greed." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, unable to maintain eye contact with the man who was systematically dismantling her entire worldview. The absolute unvarnished truth was too much for her fragile ego to bear. "I am not your savior, Patricia," Jamal said, his voice rising slightly, reclaiming his posture as a federal prosecutor. "I am the man who finalized the asset freeze warrants at 6 o'clock this morning. I am the man who ensured that Bradley's offshore accounts were locked down before he even finished his celebratory cigar. I did not do this to destroy your family. I did this because my actual family, my wife Rachel, asked me to protect the only innocent person in this entire fraudulent nightmare." Jamal stood up, towering over the weeping woman. He looked down at her with the cold, detached professionalism of a law enforcement officer addressing a convicted felon. "There will be no leniency," Jamal declared, delivering the final crushing verdict. "There will be no backroom deals or quiet settlements to protect the precious family name. Bradley committed federal crimes, and you actively aided his financial evasion. My office will prosecute this case to the absolute fullest extent of the law. You can save your tears for the sentencing hearing." Patricia collapsed, completely curling into a tight ball on the floor, her wails echoing miserably down the corridor. She had tried to leverage family loyalty to escape federal justice, only to be destroyed by the very man she had deemed unworthy of her bloodline. Jamal had not just denied her request. He had permanently cemented her downfall using her own toxic bigotry as the foundation. I watched Jamal straighten his tie, his expression completely composed. The score had been settled. The arrogant matriarch had been reduced to nothing, and the brilliant attorney had executed his retribution with flawless, unapologetic karma. But the reckoning was not entirely finished. As Patricia's sobs filled the silence, the heavy wooden doors of the maternity suite slowly creaked open. The heavy wooden doors of the maternity suite slowly creaked open. The rusted sound of the hinges sliced through Patricia's pathetic sobbing, drawing every eye in the corridor toward the threshold. Audrey stepped out. She looked nothing like the pristine, devoted partner Patricia had been bragging about just an hour earlier. She was clad in a faded standard-issue hospital gown that hung loosely from her shoulders. Her face was entirely drained of color, her skin a sickly, translucent white under the harsh fluorescent lights. She gripped the metal doorframe with one hand for support, while her other hand clutched her stomach. She had obviously heard the screaming. The walls of the VIP suite were thick, but Jamal's booming federal decrees and Patricia's hysterical wailing had easily penetrated the soundproofing. Audrey surveyed the absolute carnage scattered across the polished linoleum. She saw Bradley, the man she had manipulated into ruining his own life, sitting in a paralyzed catatonic slump against the baseboards. She saw Patricia, the aristocratic matriarch who had championed her, curled into a weeping broken ball on the floor. She saw me standing tall next to Jamal, flanked by the very federal authority she had arrogantly assumed she could outsmart. Then her wide, panicked eyes locked onto Vincent. The billionaire stood perfectly still, his hands resting comfortably in the pockets of his tailored trousers. He watched her emerge with the detached clinical fascination of a scientist observing a trapped insect. Audrey's survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She completely ignored the devastated man who had just thrown away his marriage and his freedom to buy her a fleet of luxury cars. She bypassed Bradley without sparing him a single glance. Instead, she hobbled directly toward the billionaire venture capitalist. She instantly deployed the weapon that had worked for her countless times before. She played the helpless, terrified victim. Vincent Audrey whimpered, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. Her eyes filled with large, glossy tears that spilled perfectly down her pale cheeks. Vincent, you have to listen to me. It is not what it sounds like. I was so incredibly scared. She reached out her hand, desperate to touch his arm, desperate to establish the physical connection she had used to manipulate him in the past. Vincent simply took one deliberate step backward. He did not say a word, but the profound glacial disgust radiating from his gray eyes was unmistakable. The silent rejection caused Audrey to falter, but her desperation pushed her to double down on her performance. Bradley was controlling everything. Audrey sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at the broken CEO on the floor. He was unhinged. He threatened me. He forced me to sign those shell company documents. I only took the money because I wanted to secure a safe environment for our son. For your son. Vincent. I did everything to protect our baby from his chaotic financial ruin. I was just trying to survive. Bradley lifted his head, his eyes widening at the sheer audacious scale of her betrayal. He tried to formulate a defense, tried to scream that she was the architect of the entire scheme. But his voice completely failed him. He'd just watched the woman he had destroyed his life for effortlessly throw him directly under the federal bus. Vincent did not even look at Bradley. He kept his steely gaze locked entirely on Audrey. You are a truly spectacular actress, Audrey, Vincent said. His voice was a low, vibrating rumble that lacked even a microscopic trace of sympathy. If I did not have a comprehensive encrypted digital dossier proving that you personally orchestrated the transfer of $3, $2 million into an offshore account registered under your maiden name, I might actually believe your tragic performance. Audrey swallowed hard, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Vincent, please, I love you. We can be a family now. We do not need Bradley anymore." Vincent let out a short, sharp breath of pure repulsion. "Love is a concept you are entirely incapable of comprehending," he stated coldly. "You do not love me. You love my investment portfolio. You saw my capital as your personal lottery ticket, and you used a gullible, insecure fool to cash it in. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You assumed I was as stupid and easily manipulated as the man currently crying on the floor." He stepped closer to her, his towering presence forcing Audrey to shrink back against the hospital wall. "You poisoned Natalie." Vincent whispered, his voice dripping with lethal condemnation. "You laced the prenatal vitamins of your supposed best friend with abortifacients because her pregnancy threatened your financial timeline. You murdered an unborn child to ensure your fraudulent pipeline remained open. You are not a victim. Audrey, you are a highly calculating, remorseless sociopath. And sociopaths do not get to raise my children." Audrey let out a strangled gasp. "What are you saying? He is my baby. You cannot take my son away from me." "I already have," Vincent replied with absolute terrifying certainty. At 7 o'clock this morning, the moment the paternity results were legally verified, my private legal team filed an emergency ex parte motion in family court. We submitted the toxicology report proving you poisoned Natalie. We submitted the financial records proving your active engagement in international wire fraud. The judge reviewed the evidence and instantly recognized that you are a severe immediate danger to the physical and emotional safety of a minor. Vincent adjusted his cuff, delivering the ultimate legal checkmate. The court granted me immediate sole and exclusive physical custody of my son. You have been entirely stripped of all parental rights. A state-appointed social worker is currently inside that maternity suite preparing the infant for a secure medical transfer to my private estate. You will never be allowed within 500 feet of him again." "No!" Audrey screamed, her voice cracking as the reality of her complete loss finally hit her. She lunged forward, trying to push past Vincent to reach the heavy wooden doors. "You cannot do this. I am his mother." Vincent did not move. He simply stared down at the frantic, hysterical woman. "You are an incubator who attempted to use a child as a billion-dollar hostage negotiation." He corrected her sharply. "And your negotiation has failed catastrophically." Audrey collapsed to her knees, clutching her hospital gown, weeping with loud, ugly sobs. She looked at me, her eyes wild with desperation. "Natalie, please, tell them I am a good person. Tell them we were best friends. You know I would never hurt a baby." I looked down at the woman who had smiled in my face while destroying my life. "You stopped being my friend the day you handed Bradley my forged infertility diagnosis," I said, my voice empty of any lingering warmth. "You sealed your own fate the night you watched me bleed out on my bathroom floor. You have absolutely no one to blame but yourself." Vincent delivered his final crushing blow. "You are not just losing the child, Audrey," he stated, his tone as unforgiving as a steel trap. "My corporate attorneys have officially partnered with Jamal's federal prosecution team. I am pressing criminal charges against you for extortion, grand larceny, and corporate espionage. The government is seizing every single luxury asset you purchased with my stolen capital. The waterfront house, the custom vehicles, the designer jewelry. It is all gone." Audrey stared up at him, her face a mask of absolute devastation. She had played the ultimate high-stakes game, gambling my life, Bradley's freedom, and her own child for a chance at infinite wealth. Now the wheel had stopped spinning and her number had not hit. She had no money, no home, no billionaire lover, no fallback victim, and no child. She was left with absolutely nothing except a hospital gown and the impending certainty of a long, miserable stay in a federal prison cell. The sharp, synchronized chime of the hospital elevator echoed down the hallway for the third and final time that morning. The heavy silver doors slid open, revealing 3 men moving in absolute unison. They did not wear bespoke suits or carry designer briefcases. They wore dark utilitarian windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI across the back panels. They moved with the unmistakable heavy tread of federal law enforcement officers executing a high-profile arrest warrant. Their expressions were completely blank, their eyes scanning the corridor with professional detachment as they zeroed in on their target. Jamal straightened his tie, the intimidating aura of the federal prosecutor fully eclipsing any remaining trace of the polite brother-in-law. He turned away from Audrey's hysterical sobbing and walked directly toward the lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe crew cut. "Agent Miller." Jamal greeted him, his voice echoing with administrative finality. "The targets have been secured. The asset freezes are currently active across all domestic and international accounts." Jamal reached into his pristine leather briefcase one final time. He did not pull out medical records or financial spreadsheets. He withdrew a thick stack of manila folders, each one bearing the official seal of a United States federal magistrate. He handed the stack to Agent Miller. "These are the finalized arrest warrants," Jamal stated clearly, ensuring his voice carried down the hallway so Bradley and Patricia could hear every single devastating syllable. 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 47 counts of international wire fraud, 22 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of perjury during a federal mediation proceeding. Agent Miller accepted the folders, giving Jamal a curt nod of professional respect. "Thank you, counselor. We will take it from here." The 3 agents bypassed Patricia, who was still curled on the floor, and marched directly toward Bradley. The former tech visionary was practically catatonic, his back pressed hard against the heavy wooden doors of the VIP maternity suite. His eyes were wide and unblinking, staring blankly at the approaching agents, as if they were a hallucination he could simply wish away. "Bradley," Agent Miller announced, his voice booming with the absolute crushing authority of the United States government. "Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Bradley did not move. He seemed entirely incapable of processing the command. His brain, which had spent the last decade convincing him he was an untouchable genius, simply shut down in the face of imminent incarceration. "I said stand up," Agent Miller repeated, stepping closer and dropping his hand to the tactical belt at his waist. "If you do not comply immediately, we will forcibly restrain you." The threat of physical force finally penetrated the dense fog of Bradley's narcissism. He let out a pathetic whimpering sound, a sound completely devoid of dignity or pride. He slowly pushed himself off the floor, his legs trembling so violently he could barely stand straight. He looked at me, a desperate silent plea screaming from his bloodshot eyes. He wanted me to save him. He wanted the woman he had discarded and gaslighted to magically intervene and stop the federal government from taking his freedom. I simply crossed my arms over my chest and stared back at him with absolute freezing indifference. I offered him nothing. Agent Miller grabbed Bradley's right arm, spinning the broken CEO around and shoving him face first against the polished wooden doors. The impact echoed sharply in the quiet corridor. The second agent grabbed Bradley's left arm, violently wrenching it behind his back. "Bradley," Agent Miller recited, his voice monotone and practiced, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The harsh metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Bradley's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the physical manifestation of consequence. It was the sound of my stolen equity, my destroyed sanity, and my shattered marriage finally being avenged. "No!" Patricia suddenly shrieked. The aristocratic matriarch, who had been sobbing quietly on the floor, erupted into a sudden explosive fit of violent hysteria. The sight of her golden child being physically restrained by federal agents completely broke her fragile grip on reality. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive designer shoes slipping wildly on the polished linoleum. "You cannot take him!" Patricia screamed, launching herself forward like a deranged animal. He is a good boy. He did not do anything wrong. You are making a terrible mistake. Let him go right now." She threw herself at Agent Miller, her manicured hands clawing frantically at the agent's dark windbreaker. She tried to physically wedge herself between the federal officer and her handcuffed son, completely oblivious to the severe legal consequences of assaulting law enforcement. "Ma'am, step back immediately," the third agent commanded, rushing forward to intercept her. Patricia ignored the warning. She swung her purse wildly, striking the third agent in the shoulder while continuously screaming Bradley's name. The aristocratic facade was entirely obliterated. She was no longer a high society woman. She was a frantic accomplice trying to physically obstruct a federal arrest. The third agent did not hesitate. He grabbed Patricia by the shoulders forcefully, spinning her around and shoving her face first against the opposite wall. The impact knocked the breath out of her, silencing her hysterical screaming in an instant. "Patricia!" the agent barked, pinning her arms behind her back with overwhelming force. "You are currently interfering with a federal arrest. You are assaulting a federal officer. If you do not cease resisting immediately, I will place you under arrest for obstruction of justice and obstruction of a federal investigation. Do you understand me?" Patricia gasped for air, her cheek pressed hard against the cold. Sterile hospital wall. The sheer, terrifying physical reality of the federal agent subduing her finally pierced her hysteria. She went completely limp, sobbing uncontrollably as the agent held her firmly in place. She was trapped, humiliated, and utterly powerless. "You have the right to an attorney." Agent Miller continued seamlessly, ignoring the chaos behind him as he finished reading Bradley his Miranda rights. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" Bradley did not answer. He was weeping openly now, hot tears streaming down his face as the agents pulled him away from the maternity doors and began marching him down the long corridor toward the elevators. I watched them walk away, feeling a profound, deep-seated sense of absolute closure. The man who had mocked my ambition, who had used my grief to steal my assets, and who had tried to build a fraudulent empire on my destroyed life, was being paraded through a hospital hallway in handcuffs. He was leaving with absolutely nothing, heading straight toward a federal holding cell where his arrogance would be systematically crushed. Jamal stepped up beside me, watching the agents load Bradley into the waiting elevator. He let out a long, slow breath, releasing 5 years of suppressed frustration and toxic familial tension. "Well," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a quiet, satisfied rumble. "That was an incredibly productive Tuesday morning." I turned away from the closing elevator doors, leaving Patricia weeping against the wall and Audrey sobbing on the floor. I looked at Jamal and offered him a genuine, unburdened smile. It certainly was. I agreed, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 12 months finally lift off my shoulders. "Now, how about we go get some coffee? I hear the cafeteria downstairs makes a fantastic espresso." 6 months after that morning coffee, I was swirling a very different, vastly more expensive beverage. I sat in a plush leather booth at one of the most exclusive rooftop restaurants in downtown Seattle, looking out over the glittering city skyline. Sitting directly across from me was Rachel. She was Jamal's wife, Bradley's sister, and surprisingly one of the best friends I had ever made. The profound irony of sharing a celebratory dinner with my former sister-in-law was not lost on either of us. But surviving a narcissistic family dynamic has a funny way of forging unbreakable bonds. Rachel raised her crystal glass, her dark eyes shining with genuine happiness, and offered a toast to new beginnings and firmly closed cases. We clinked our glasses together, savoring the rich taste of absolute, undisputed victory. The federal justice system had moved with terrifying, relentless efficiency. Over our appetizers, Rachel delivered the final satisfying updates on the people who had tried so desperately to destroy us. Bradley had officially taken a plea deal to avoid a humiliating, highly publicized trial. The federal judge had shown absolutely zero leniency. handing him a non-negotiable 15-year sentence in a maximum security penitentiary. My ex-husband had traded his custom-tailored shirts and venture capital pitches for a standard-issue jumpsuit. He was entirely stripped of his stolen millions, his fraudulent companies, and his towering ego. Patricia did not fare much better in the aftermath. The federal government had systematically seized her entire estate and liquidated her generational wealth to pay off the massive restitution Bradley owed to Vincent. She was left completely bankrupt. The arrogant, aristocratic matriarch who had once terrorized country club galas and mocked my career was now living in a cheap, run-down motel on the dreary outskirts of the city. Rachel mentioned that her mother had tried calling them a few times, weeping and begging Jamal for financial help, but they had permanently blocked her number. As for Audrey, her spectacular fall from grace was total and uncompromising. Vincent had kept his promise to the letter. His army of ruthless corporate attorneys had secured full physical and legal custody of his son within a matter of weeks. Audrey was permanently barred from coming anywhere near the child or the billionaire ever again. She was currently out on bail, living in a cramped apartment and facing her own impending criminal trial for extortion and medical fraud. She had gambled her entire existence on a stolen fortune and walked away with nothing but a looming prison sentence. I took a long, satisfying sip of my wine, leaning back against the comfortable leather seat. The nightmare was officially over. I had emerged stronger, wealthier, and completely free from their toxic grip. People say the best revenge is living well. I disagree. The best revenge is living well and making sure the people who stabbed you in the back pay for it with every cent they have. Have you ever used hard facts to crush a traitor? Tell me your story in the comments. And remember to like and subscribe for more. One of the most profound lessons embedded within these narratives is the painful but liberating realization that biological ties do not guarantee unconditional love or respect. Often, individuals exhaust themselves trying to earn validation from family members who view their worth through a distorted lens of favoritism, social status, or conditional expectations. The protagonists in these accounts endured years of emotional neglect, gaslighting, and outright betrayal, clinging to the hope that their achievements or compliance would eventually win them the love they inherently deserved. However, the turning point invariably arrives wrapped in devastating betrayal: a stolen property, a hospital abandonment, a public disinheritance, or a cruel humiliation during a moment of profound vulnerability. While these moments are deeply traumatic, they serve as a crucial catalyst for awakening. They shatter the illusion of the perfect family, forcing a confrontation with reality. The core lesson is that losing the approval of a toxic environment is not a personal failure. It is a necessary prerequisite for true freedom and self-discovery. By walking away from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove their value to those committed to misunderstanding them, individuals can finally unearth their authentic strength. They learn to define success entirely on their own terms, realizing that true family consists of the people who actively choose to show up during the darkest hours, not just those who happen to share DNA. Healing truly begins when you stop accepting mere scraps of affection and start cultivating a life rooted in genuine mutual respect and undeniable self-worth. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your life and boldly step away from any table where your fundamental worth is no longer being served.